Chapter 181, Let It Air. Who brought them back? Saul asked in surprise. Both of them had died in Hanging Hands Valley, killed by the Wraith Morden. At the time, they were being pursued and had to leave in a hurry. There was no chance to retrieve the bodies. He hadn't expected to see them again. Probably Machi Machi. He lives in Black Castle Forest near the border. When you're out traveling in the future, you can rest at his place. Machi Machi was that long, slender man, whose home was also long and slender. Saul hadn't expected him to manage bringing the corpses back from such a dangerous place. But the two bodies looked a little different from how they had in life. It wasn't from post-mortem changes like livor mortis or gigantism, but something more subtle. Herman's skin had become coarse. Looking closer, it wasn't that the texture had roughened, it was now covered in tiny pores. It was as if someone had taken a silver needle and poked little holes into an orange peel. On closer inspection, the difference was obvious. Is that something that secreted out from under his skin? Haywood gave a slight smile. A kind of silver metal, you've probably seen it before, but after it emerged the corpse deformed badly. For aesthetic purposes I had to fill it in with other materials. He tapped the glass-like transparent case. It hasn't fully dried inside yet. Be gentle when moving it. Saul opened the lid of the case and pulled a metal rod from his coat, lightly pressing it against the back of Herman's hand. A milky white fluid began to ooze from the pores on the back of the hand. But once Saul withdrew the rod, the liquid slowly receded. The seepage rate's a bit high. I'll let it air out a bit before putting it in with the rest, Saul said. Then he turned to Bill's corpse. Anything I should know about Bill's body? Haywood replied, nothing major. Mentor Gadu already helped neutralize the toxins in his system, though it's still necessary too. He didn't finish the sentence, as Bill's lips were suddenly pushed open by a puff of air. PFFFFT. Let it vent. Haywood finished the sentence with an unfazed expression. So, all right then, I'll air this one out too. The two of them filled out the handover paperwork, officially registering the two freshly processed specimens into Warehouse 2. Haywood nodded in satisfaction, and, seeing that Saul had already moved the two transparent containers, turned to leave. At that moment, a split appeared in the hood behind him. A pair of eyes gleaming with excitement peeked through the opening. But the excitement didn't last long. Where are your eyes? A raspy female voice shouted from the back of Haywood's head, clearly frustrated. Before Saul could respond, Haywood chuckled and said, obviously you hid them. He turned back to Saul and added with a grin, of course, if you ever change your mind, we can still make that trade for that beautiful pair of eyes you've hidden away. Still smiling, Haywood stepped back and left Warehouse 2. Did he recognize the nightmare butterfly, or did he just sense the cocoon's value? Saul couldn't be sure. All he could do was stay alert around someone with such uncanny perception. He moved Bill and Herman's bodies into storage. Since the new specimens were still unstable, Saul left them in their transparent containers. Interesting, their consciousnesses are with me, and now their corpses are right here too. I suppose they've been reunited. As he mused on fate's twists and turns, a sudden chill swept through him and rushed toward the two new specimens. White frost began to form on Saul's eyebrows and the tips of his hair. He quickly stepped back 2 paces to avoid the cold wave. Only then did the room's temperature return to normal. It felt like something had slipped into the corpses from all around, carried on the air. That wasn't just a drop in temperature, was it a spirit? Saul entered a semi-immersive meditation and scanned the two newcomers but found nothing. The chill's already gone. Whatever it was, the phenomenon ended before I could observe it. I'll have to remember to monitor spirit fluctuations more closely next time a new specimen arrives. He made a note while thinking it over. By now, it was almost time for his appointment with Kangsha, so Saul temporarily set aside the inspection of the new specimens. He made his way between the shelves to the items stored beneath collection, number 117. He had already checked each numbered item while organizing the warehouse in the past. Some of them looked terrifying and dangerous, while others resembled ordinary objects. Item 117, Whispers of the Elves. Saul carefully took down a bottle filled halfway with translucent liquid. Inside, a twig stood tilted, its tip submerged, with two tender green leaves sprouting just above the surface. It looked full of life, delicate and cute. The Whispers of Elves was actually the branch inside the bottle, not the bottle or the liquid itself. Those two components were used to preserve the Whispers of Elves. According to the warehouse manual, the warnings for item 117 read, "Do not pour out the liquid inside the bottle. Do not remove the branch from the bottle. If either rule is violated, immediately inform Mentor Kaz or Master Gorsa. If you encounter a creature with pale skin, golden eyes, and long ears, do not initiate contact." Besides that, the manual didn't record any usage methods for the Whispers of Elves, but Kanksha clearly had her own way. Saul didn't need to worry about that. Their agreement was, Saul would move the item just inside the bronze door. At the appointed time, he'd open the door and let Kanksha in to use Whispers of Elves. She would have 1 minute and then leave immediately. The most dangerous part for Saul was transporting the Whispers of Elves. But he wasn't a powerless first-rank apprentice anymore, who hasn't broken a few rules as a student. So, after confirming that his diary didn't issue any warnings, Saul placed the bottle containing Whispers of Elves onto a cart. Before leaving, he also grabbed a small hourglass timer. He only planned to give Kanksha a minute, just in case something went wrong. To Saul's slight surprise, he reached the bronze door without any trouble. He pulled out the tiny hourglass and waited for 7:55 p.m. It was already 7:53. He wouldn't have to wait long. But the wait felt like forever. Saul kept tapping the cart's handle with his index finger, growing more and more irritable. After 60 taps, he looked down at the hourglass again. Still 7:53. Is my sense of time off, or is the hourglass broken? He turned away and counted 60 seconds again, but when he looked back, it was still stuck at 7:53. Something's definitely wrong. Saul glanced at the tender green branch on the cart. I didn't touch it. I didn't open the bottle. So even moving it affects things. He calmed himself and pushed away the sudden frustration, entering a meditative state on the spot. In meditation, he realized there had indeed been a minor disturbance in his mental state earlier, but he hadn't noticed at all. Fortunately, it wasn't severe and could be corrected through meditation. Saul quickly stabilized his mental fluctuations. When he looked at the time again, 7:56. He immediately let go of the cart and walked to the bronze door, pushing it open. Outside stood Kanksha, her face partially hidden beneath a hood, waiting in the dark corridor. Darkness seemed to press in on her, as though trying to expel her from the first floor of the East Tower. At the sound of the door opening, she lifted her head like a statue coming to life. "You're a minute late. What happened?" she asked. Chapter 182, Whisper of the Elves. Saul immediately stepped aside. "Come in. 117 had some effect on me." Hearing this, Kanksha didn't hesitate at all and squeezed through the narrow gap in the door that Saul had opened. The moment she entered, she saw the bottle on the cart. "This is Whisper of the Elves. You've never seen it. Are you sure you want to use it?" Saul raised an eyebrow. "It's just smaller than I imagined." Without further hesitation, Kanksha took out a metal box. She flipped the lid open, revealing a damaged doll. Though it had been years since he last saw it, Saul immediately recognized it as the puppet Seed had once used. Seeing this elf puppet again, One that had once made both Kongsha and Byron nervous, didn't strike fear in Saul this time. He walked forward to inspect it. Whatever Kongsha had done to it over the past 2 years, it was clear she had transformed the puppet drastically. After examining it, Saul believed she did have the ability to interpret the whisper of the elves, and quickly went over the precautions. You can open the bottle, but don't remove the branch inside, and don't spill the liquid either. Kongsha nodded. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and carefully but swiftly opened the bottle containing the branch. Then she took out a silver foil knife and, without flinching, sliced off the tip of her tongue. The severed tongue tip fell, landing directly on the puppet in her hand. The puppet, which had previously shown no signs of movement, suddenly animated and opened its mouth wide. Its mouth was dark inside, a hollow cavity extending into the puppet's body. The tongue tip slipped into the puppet's mouth, the wound facing downward, tongue tip up, settling into what resembled a throat, and it twitched slightly as if alive. A streak of red trickled from the corners of both Kongsha and the puppet's mouths. At that moment, it was as if they shared the same mouth. Watching the blood-red tongue, Saul's face remained expressionless as he lowered his gaze to check the time. Kongsha had said it would only take a few dozen seconds. 10 seconds had already passed. Seemingly aware of Saul's actions, Kongsha sped up. She pinched the puppet's head with 2 fingers and slowly lowered it into the bottle. Under their watchful eyes, the puppet touched one of the green leaves on the branch. At that moment, Saul's eyes darted quickly left, then snapped back to focus on the branch. He half closed his eyes. He entered a semi-immersive meditative state. Kongsha's mouth opened wide, blood flowing uncontrollably from her lips. The puppet in her hands mirrored the motion, opening its mouth wide. A chant-like voice came from the puppet's mouth, ethereal, melodious, and hauntingly beautiful, making it nearly impossible not to be drawn in. In Saul's vision, a semi-transparent face appeared over the puppet's own. It was extremely blurry, but vaguely recognizable as a woman's face. Other than that, nothing else could be clearly seen. He turned toward Kongsha. There was no expression of pain on her face, but she had tilted her head slightly, as if listening intently. As time passed, Kongsha's expression grew increasingly grave. In the end, several eyeballs pressed tightly against the glass, pupils locked in place, radiating disbelief and shock. Saul broke from his meditative state and checked the time again. 40 seconds had passed. Only 20 seconds remained in the time they had agreed on, but Kongsha showed no sign of stopping. Kongsha, Saul stepped forward. 15 seconds left. Kongsha didn't respond, but the puppet in her hand suddenly turned its head. Its crudely painted brown eyes, layered with the white spectral face, locked onto Saul. The moment their eyes met, Saul felt his movements slowing down. So the earlier sense of time distortion was caused by the elven influence. Without hesitation, he pulled out a red candle from his coat and placed it on the cart. Elves might affect one's perception of time, but they likely couldn't influence the dead. No soul was more chaotic than the heap in the corpse room. Just as Saul reached for the lighter hidden under the cart, the puppet in Kongsha's hand swiftly turned back. That slow-motion sensation immediately vanished. But Saul didn't stop. He continued moving the igniter toward the candle wick. Kongsha, you have, Saul glanced at the clock, 10 seconds, 9-8. Even though 10 seconds remained, Saul had already begun activating the lighter. Just as the flame burst forth, Kongsha abruptly pulled back. The ethereal singing vanished, and even the puppet closed its mouth. Kongsha lowered her head, avoiding Saul's gaze. Silently, she returned the puppet to its metal box. She casually wiped the blood from her face with the back of her hand, then sealed the glass bottle of Whisper of the Elves. After restoring everything to its proper place, She tucked the metal box into her coat and gave Saul a slight nod, indicating she was finished. At that very moment, the hourglass marked exactly 1 minute. Saul finally let out a small breath of relief. If possible, he didn't want to fall out with Kangsha. The strongest second-rank apprentice wasn't just an empty title. Saul laid the lighter down on the cart, right where his hand could easily reach it, then stepped forward and pushed open one of the large metal doors for Kangsha. Less than 2 minutes left. You should hurry back. Ever since completing the ritual, Kangsha had remained quiet and heavy-hearted. Even the eyeballs in her mind had stopped appearing. A deep, suffocating pressure hung around her. She stood motionless while Saul tidied up the cart. Only when he opened the door did she silently turn around. At that moment, a figure suddenly entered from outside the door. Startled, Saul immediately stepped back to his cart. The somber Kangsha, however, suddenly raised her head. Her brain surged, magic flared violently, and ice crystals formed around her head. She was about to strike without hesitation. But when the figure finally stepped fully into view and revealed his face, Kangsha froze and abruptly dispelled the spell she was about to cast. Standing behind her, Saul also saw who it was. It was Haywood, the man in charge of the first storage room. Haywood was now wearing a silver silk short cloak, which was why neither of them recognized him right away. His mismatched eyes took in everything inside the room. "Did I interrupt something?" Haywood smiled. "No need to be so tense, I was just passing by." But when his gaze landed on Saul's cart, he paused and withdrew the step he'd just taken. Saul thought he was going to scold him, but instead, Haywood turned to Kangsha. "I don't really have the right to say this, but I'll still offer some advice. Don't chase after the elves' footsteps. All you'll get is a fleeting, illusory dream." As he spoke, one of his purple eyes swiveled towards Saul. "We're all pawns, accept it." Saul's eyes flickered with thought, but he kept his guard up, watching the two of them closely. They knew each other, and were more than casual acquaintances. Kangsha bit her lip tightly. Blood seeped from between her teeth. She couldn't speak, but she shook her head with all her strength. Inside the glass dome, the white slurry shook violently. Several eyeballs smacked hard against the glass wall. Haywood sighed. "You're still better off than poor Ivan. He wanders every night now, trying to reclaim his body." The mention of Ivan made Kangsha suddenly freeze. Still, she clenched her fists tightly and refused to lower her head. Haywood said no more. He gave a faint smile. "If you insist, then I'll wait for your good news." He stepped aside to clear the passage, and Kangsha swept out of the bronze doors like the wind. The heavy doors closed behind her, leaving only two men in the corridor. Now Haywood's blue and purple eyes both turned towards Saul. "I hope I'll hear good news from you too." Saul frowned slightly but said nothing. Haywood didn't bring up the eyes again. He simply nodded to Saul, then turned and entered the second metal door. Chapter 183, Temporary Locator. Saul had no time to worry about Kangsha leaving the East Tower past 8. After overhearing her conversation with Haywood, he was incredibly curious about the relationship between the two. One was the elusive third rank in charge of the first storage room, the other the most formidable second rank. But from the way Haywood spoke, it seemed like both of them, and even Ivan, were just pawns to be discarded. Saul gripped the cart handle tightly and looked at the bottle standing steadily on the shelf, the whisper of the elves resting inside. He had no idea what Kangsha had heard there. On the way back, the branches once again displayed their ability to blur one's sense of time. When Saul returned the bottle to the shelf, he thought 10 minutes had passed. But when he turned to look at the hourglass clock on the wall, he realized only 3 minutes had gone by. He stepped back to the long table and silently started counting the seconds in his mind. When he felt a full minute had passed and looked up again, only 30-something seconds had gone by. Even after putting the whisper of the elves back, My perception of time is still off, but this distortion seems to recover gradually, and meditation can significantly speed up the process. It took Saul about an hour to fully recalibrate his perception. He glanced at the shelf again, still unsettled. All I did was move a bottle and push a cart, yet my sense of time was distorted. I can't imagine what kind of price Kanksha paid for that listening ritual. But aside from being emotionally downcast, she didn't seem too affected. Is it because of the locator, or does she have another way of neutralizing the effects? This time, although there was no immediate danger, the subtle mental influence was no less alarming. If the whisper of the elves grew stronger, it might drive someone mad, trapped in a forever-stretching timeline. It was now 9:30 p.m. Not yet time to rest, not yet time to lower his guard. Saul pulled out the 2 locator schematics Kanksha had given him. After confirming with the diary that there were no major issues, he began to examine them. After several days of research, he believed that both his out-of-body episodes and the strange dissolution of his physical form stemmed from irregularities in his mental body. The cause of these abnormalities remained unidentified, but Saul had found a potential solution in the library on the 18th floor. Though it was still only a hypothesis, unlike other apprentices and wizards, Saul could mostly verify such theories through pure thought. He didn't face a high sunk cost. Now that he had reached the 2nd rank, Saul's routine mostly revolved around studying fundamental knowledge, sorcery, scripts, and researching the locator device. He wondered if Lord Gorsa had sensed that something was wrong with his body, which might explain why he'd been brought to the 18th floor's library. Regardless, Saul had indeed found many books helpful to his current state. Among them were pieces of knowledge and fragmented blueprints about locators. Combined with the 2 complete schematics he just received from Kanksha, Saul was now fully equipped to dive into the locator project. However, unlike others, Saul had already been carrying a locator of sorts, his greatest reliance, the diary of a dead wizard. Despite the diary's power, it had a well-known shortcoming. Saul couldn't control it, except when communicating with the consciousness inside the diary's black page, at which point it would obediently float in and out. The diary ignored his requests completely at other times. The most crucial issue was that Saul still hadn't discovered how his mental body connected to the diary. He didn't even know where exactly the diary existed, within his body or soul. As such, the locator experiment wasn't going as smoothly as he had initially hoped. This isn't something I can rush. For a 2nd rank apprentice to ascend to 3rd rank, they must not only meet the physical and spiritual benchmarks but also select and fuse with a locator. Even someone as capable as Kanksha has apparently been stuck on the fusion step for years. But by the end of May, I'll be leaving the tower to carry out Lord Gorsa's external assignment. If my soul slips out then, it would be extremely dangerous. Though Saul could now return to his body in just 6 steps, enemies weren't likely to give him even half a second to recover in a real battle. With that in mind, Saul devised a temporary method to stabilize his spiritual form. A temporary locator. These were rare and highly valued even among advanced apprentices. They served as a supplemental locator tailored to the wizard's own, providing dual protection for the spiritual body and consciousness, like carrying a riot shield over a bomb suit. The protection might be limited in strength and scope, but it was better than nothing. In times of mental disruption or contamination, it could further aid in recovery. With his mind made up, Saul pulled out the doll he'd borrowed from Mentor Kaz's lab, without having paid for it. After some thought, he also placed a red candle on the desk. Looking left and right, the vast amount of foundational knowledge and formulas he had studied over the past few days swirled in his mind. Then, Saul buried himself in the parchment and began sketching runes. As he wrote and calculated, more and more materials were gathered on the table. The yellowed sheets gradually filled with intricate spell diagrams and crafting formulas for magical apparatuses. As the formulas began taking shape, Saul mentally simulated scenarios in which he'd use his self-designed temporary locator. Each time the diary would pop out tirelessly, even gleefully, throwing cold water on his ideas or molten lava. Papers densely filled with writing piled up in the corner of the desk. When they grew into a small mountain, they eventually collapsed onto the floor. Yet Saul remained focused, still hunting for the optimal solution. A few days later, in a small town, one settlement away from the Wizard Tower, storm clouds loomed over Samp Town, and strong winds howled through. Rain looked ready to pour at any moment. Saul sat in a plain, unmarked one-seater carriage. He wore a simple coarse shirt with a leather breastplate over it. His gloved arms, the most eye-catching part of his attire, added to his disguise. At first glance, he didn't look like a wizard apprentice. He looked more like a mercenary. Just a bit short. This mission was a special one. First, because it was issued personally by Tower Master Gorsa, who had warned Saul twice about the potential danger. And second, because Saul had his own goals. After entering the town, the carriage began to slow. Saul turned his head, using the flapping curtain stirred by the wind to observe the street outside. Perhaps due to the coming storm, the streets were eerily empty. Just then the driver up front suddenly turned around and shouted, "Young master, the road ahead is blocked." The driver was the same one who had taken Saul to Black Castle Forest. After Saul returned to the Wizard Tower directly from Hanging Hands Valley, the driver had gotten word and rushed back a few days later. Hearing Saul needed a carriage again, he had immediately volunteered. As soon as they left the Wizard Tower's outer wastelands, he had begun respectfully addressing Saul as young master, subtly and cautiously expressing his gratitude. Saul pushed the door open, and a gust of wind forced him to squint. Up ahead, the narrow road was piled high with wooden barricades and sandbags. A sign flapped violently in the wind, marked in the common tongue, "Danger, keep out." "Is there any other path to reach our destination?" Saul asked, projecting his voice clearly to the driver. The driver was about to answer when the swirling wind ripped his hat off, revealing a thumb-sized mushroom growing from the top of his head. The little mushroom quivered violently under the wind, as if it might be torn away at any second. Saul raised a hand and caught the hat, setting it back firmly on the driver's head. "Thank you, young master," the driver called out, raising his voice over the roaring wind since he lacked the means for transmission spells. "There's no other path. The manor we're headed to is at the very end of this road, in the southernmost part of the town." Chapter 184. The Storm Approaches. Saul nodded and leapt directly off the carriage, against the wind. The wind blew open the collar of his shirt slightly, revealing a thumb-sized wooden figurine on a black cord hanging around his neck. The cord was short, so the figurine rested snugly between his collarbones. Even with the jolt of his jump, it didn't sway in the slightest. Upon closer inspection, there was a small wooden spike on the back of the figurine, piercing deeply into Saul's skin. This was the temporary locator he had rushed to have made before setting out. It would last for 3 months. There was basically no need to worry about accidental soul detachment. "You should go find an inn and rest. I'll go on alone from here." The coachman hesitated, then cautiously asked, "Young master, please allow me to wait for you here." The wind howled fiercely, and no one knew how heavy the rain might get later. Even Saul himself wasn't sure how long he'd be gone. Despite that, the coachman still wanted to wait for him in place. Saul didn't press the issue. "As you wish. If you stay by the roadside, hide inside the carriage. Don't sit outside in the rain like a fool." The coachman bowed deeply. "Please be careful, young master." Leaving the coachman behind, Saul pressed forward through the wind toward the blocked-off path. He observed it for a while and confirmed that it had been barricaded layer upon layer until the entire path was thoroughly sealed. He walked toward a dilapidated shack to the side and knocked on the door. After a long pause, an old woman in tattered clothes and with a dazed expression cracked the door open slightly. "What is it?" Her voice was swallowed by the howling wind. Saul reached out to steady the door. "Hello, madam, I haven't been here in many years. What happened to this road? Why has it been sealed?" The old woman clearly heard him, but didn't realize it was thanks to a bit of spell. When she saw Saul asking about the path, a trace of unease flickered in her cloudy eyes. "You can't go in there. Anyone who goes in either dies or goes mad." That sounded dangerous, which only confirmed that this was exactly the place Saul was looking for. "But I have friends who live there. Are they all dead?" The old woman glanced up at Saul in surprise. She looked over his plain clothes and hesitated before replying. "If they weren't dead, they'd have moved away. I stayed because I'm too old to walk far. Young man, take my advice. Whether your friends are still alive or not, don't go looking for them. Just go back to where you came from." Unwilling to give up, Saul pressed on. "Madam, do you know what exactly happened?" But the old woman clearly didn't want to answer and began to retreat into the house. Seeing this, Saul opened his hand, revealing a silver coin. The old woman's eyes widened, and she no longer tried to shut the door. Her gaze fixed on the silver coin, she said with a trembling voice, "All I know is that the death started at the end of the road in the Ralph estate. It's changed names several times, but now it's called Ralph Estate again." She still tried to dissuade Saul. "You shouldn't go there or ask questions. It's far too dangerous." "Ralph," Saul murmured, "has no one done anything about this?" This place still belonged to the Wizard Tower's territory. If reported, it could qualify as a second-rank apprentice's external assignment. But the old woman only shook her head. Saul asked a few more questions, but she could barely answer any of them. In the end, he placed the silver coin in her hand and turned to leave. As he climbed over the barricade and continued on, the old woman closed the door behind him with a worried expression, then grinned, barring a twisted smile of excitement. She gleefully polished the silver coin again and again, even kissing it, before carefully placing it into an inconspicuous ceramic jar. Inside the jar was already a thick pile of copper and silver coins. There were even a few gold coins. Once she was done, the old woman returned to her usual sorrowful look, sat back on her small stool, and waited for the next traveler to ask for directions. Ralph was Seed's grandfather, and Seed was the first mortal enemy Saul had encountered after arriving in this world. Most importantly, Seed knew that Saul possessed the diary of a dead wizard. Back then, Saul had used the diary to obtain information from Seed's lingering consciousness that the diary of a dead wizard had been passed down by their Bloodthorn family ancestors. Yet no one had ever been able to unlock its secrets and become its true master. To that end, Seed's grandfather had tried all sorts of methods and was driven mad for a long time. According to Seed, by the time he entered the Wizard Tower, his grandfather had already killed everyone else in the family, and eventually, even the grandfather himself died. But that raised a question. How had Seed survived and made it to the tower where the diary was? "The Tower Master sent me here to handle a loose end. It's very likely related to Seed and his family. Are there any other survivors from their bloodline, or perhaps some lingering wraiths? And most importantly, does anyone else know the diary still exists?" The thought of the diary made Saul tense up. Cleaning up the remnants of a 2-year-old incident. Why wait 2 years? Was it just to wait until I advanced to second rank? That would mean the enemy's strength was at least on par with a typical second-rank apprentice. Since this involved his most important secret, Saul frowned deeply. In truth, after Seed's death, Saul had planned to visit his family's estate to uncover the diary's secrets. But back then, he was only first rank, neither qualified nor strong enough to leave the tower, so he'd had to shelve the idea. He hadn't expected the tower master to assign him here ahead of time. So this loose end was definitely tied to Seed, and the strange events in Samp Town were likely connected to it as well. For this mission, Saul had deliberately concealed all signs that marked him as a Wizard Tower apprentice, donning the gear of a regular mercenary. But on these deserted streets, his presence still stood out. Another gust of wind roared past, lifting a broken tree branch from the ground. By the time the branch landed again, Saul had vanished. When he reached the end of the path, the clouds overhead had grown even heavier. Though it was still daytime, the sky looked as dim as dusk. A grand estate loomed before Saul's eyes. Even though the gate bore marks of weathering, and the walls were crumbling with debris and dead branches scattered everywhere, it couldn't hide the estate's former splendor. Peering over the tall wall, he could see the rooftops of the manor's castle in the distance. As he pondered whether to push open the gate or climb over the wall, he suddenly sensed someone watching him. Without hesitation, Saul turned and gave chase. Mid-run, he suddenly crouched, then sprang up, snatching a pebble and flinging it with force. Ow! The boy yelped. Saul stepped forward, just about to grab him, when suddenly a small fireball shot toward him from afar. He quickly dodged, but the fireball exploded mid-air, turning into a shower of sparks that filled every direction he could escape to. Nowhere to run, so he didn't. A transparent giant hand appeared in front of him, swatting at the fiery embers. The fierce sparks were extinguished in an instant, most of them blown away. The few remaining couldn't harm Saul. Oh, a second, older voice sounded from behind a nearby building. Saul turned his head to see an elderly man with white hair and a wooden cane stepping out from around the corner, staring at him in surprise. You can cast 0-tier spells instantly, not bad. You've already advanced to second rank, haven't you? Though the man was old, his movements were agile. Judging from the magical fluctuations earlier, the white-haired man seemed to be an ordinary third-rank apprentice, unless, of course, he was hiding his true power. Chapter 185, The Ralph Estate. Since the other party had ceased their attack and even stepped out from the shadows, Saul relaxed slightly on the surface. "Who are you? Are you the true wizards of this place?" he asked. "Ahem." The white-haired old man let out 2 awkward coughs. "Of course not. I'm just a third-rank wandering wizard. Name's Clawn. This is my apprentice, Swan, a freshly advanced first rank." Third rank, so a third-rank apprentice, not a third-rank true wizard. But then the man called himself a wandering wizard. Although the term could be used broadly for all wizards and wizard apprentices, Saul had the feeling the man was intentionally hiding his identity. Just then, the boy Swan, who had been struck by Saul's pebble, limped over to stand beside the older wizard apprentice, glaring at Saul with indignation. The boy looked no older than 11 or 12, clearly younger than Saul. His pant leg was torn at the shin, revealing a patch of scraped skin. Saul offered Swan a faint smile. "Sorry, I'm a bit jumpy. If someone's watching me from the shadows, I tend to strike first." Swan's eyes widened, and he was about to speak, but his mentor raised a hand to stop him. "Swan's only first rank. No need to apologize to him. To spy on a high-level wizard like you, letting him live was already showing mercy." At those words, Swan's expression turned aggrieved. The tension finally eased somewhat. The older third-rank apprentice, Clawn, pointed toward the nearby manor. "You here to try your luck too?" "Try my luck," Saul echoed. The Ralph estate. Claude gestured toward the frostbitten manor behind him. Some years ago, an out-of-town merchant was duped into buying the place, but he didn't know this had once belonged to a long-standing wizard family. When the merchant left on business, his family and every servant vanished overnight. Since then, the estate has become the most terrifying legend in the entire town of Samp. Ordinary folk living in a wizard's former home, that's just asking to die. But there's no way he didn't look into the place before buying. Sounds like someone deliberately hid the truth, Saul murmured after a moment's thought. Claude's eyes lit up. Exactly what I thought. Over the past 2 years, that merchant spent a lot hearing adventurers to go in and retrieve the valuables supposedly left inside, but none of them ever made it back. Just half a month ago, he even convinced a local noble to send in a team of knights. Saul suddenly cut in. He's been sending people in for 2 years straight. He can't still be unaware that this was once a wizard's estate, right? Claude shrugged. Of course he knows, but what's inside that manor is too important to him, so he keeps earning money and hearing people. When no adventurers were willing to go anymore, he turned to stronger ones, knights. But they didn't come out either. Saul narrowed his eyes. Something felt off. Even a wealthy merchant couldn't afford to waste money like this forever. And what could possibly be in that estate to make him hold on for 2 years without giving up? He glanced at Claude, still smiling, and the sulking boy Swan. Were you two hired by the merchant as well? Swan muttered, he's just a normal guy with a bit of money. No way he could afford to hire teacher. Claude replied, call it a partnership. He gave me intel on what happened and the layout of the estate, and I agreed to bring back one item for him. And you're telling me all this because, Saul frowned. You're from the Wizard Tower, aren't you? Claude asked cheerfully, directly calling out Saul's identity. Swan blinked in disbelief, looking between his mentor and Saul, his earlier dissatisfaction replaced with fear. Saul neither confirmed nor denied it. Seeing Saul remain silent, Claude didn't press. I'm guessing you've already figured it out. I want to invite you to explore the estate together. Duxie, that's the name of that merchant. He's hired plenty of powerful people over the past 2 years, even some first-rank apprentices. But none made it out. Not just that, even the villagers living near the estate are starting to be affected. I've analyzed the strange phenomena in this place. After fermenting over 2 years, the situation has become much more dangerous. That also means there must be wizard-related remnants left by the fallen Bloodthorn family. But the most important thing is the secret buried deep in this estate. The Bloodthorn family once produced true wizards. There will definitely be unpredictable dangers within. That's why I suggest we cooperate. It'll be safer. Listening to Claude's explanation, Saul turned to gaze through the crumbling wall at the interior of the estate. The entire manor was shrouded under heavy, dark clouds, and even the wind there seemed fiercer than outside. Suddenly, Saul thought he heard something. He perked his ears, listening carefully, but only the howling wind met him. Claude was still waiting for his reply. I'm open to cooperating, Saul said, but I suggest we enter separately first. This place is too big, moving together would be inefficient. Claude frowned. If they didn't move together, how was it a cooperation? Saul smiled. From here you can see the tallest building inside the estate. That should be the manor's main residence, the castle. Normally that's where the most important things are kept, but just to be safe we should check the surrounding areas. Let's each enter from different sides, scout the area, and if things seem dangerous, we don't go too deep. After an hour, we meet in front of the castle, share intel, and decide whether to go inside or check other spots. His proposal wasn't made on a whim, through the broken wall. Saul had vaguely sensed that the layout of the estate contained traces of a magical formation, but due to age and damage, he couldn't yet discern its properties. Out of caution, he wanted to understand the manor's full layout first. If he could analyze the formation's rules and nature, perhaps he wouldn't need to blindly search to uncover the secrets within. Now that Saul had taken the lead in the conversation, the boy Swan looked nervously at his teacher. This time, Klon didn't hesitate long and agreed to Saul's suggestion. All right, according to the intel I got, the valuables are all inside the castle, but you make a good point. Wizards mustn't only focus on the danger ahead. Analyzing the surroundings is important too. So, shall we act now? Now, Klon was slightly startled. As they spoke, Saul once again heard something, but when he focused, the sound vanished. He checked his condition. His magic flow was stable, mental form was calm, and his diary was still pretending to sleep. That sound just now, he hadn't imagined it. That only made him more curious and cautious about the Ralph estate. If we've decided to go in, of course we move now. What are you waiting for someone else? Chapter 186, Brother. Adventuring alone meant keeping anything important close at hand. If something wasn't important enough to carry, what use was there in bringing it into the estate? That old apprentice must have waited outside the estate for a long time. He even had his student hide and observe from a distance. He was probably hopping to gather more companions before heading in. Now that Saul had a rough understanding of the estate's situation, he had no intention of acting like Klon, nervously waiting, unsure if others would arrive. Klon looked somewhat embarrassed. After agreeing to the merchant's request, he'd seen the merchant go on to seek help from others. That made Klon displeased, but in truth, Klon hoped for more companions to share in the venture. Even though the Bloodthorn family had declined, their former reputation and influence still made a wandering apprentice like him cautious. That's why, after arriving at the estate ahead of the others, he hadn't rushed in. Instead, he quietly waited in hiding, hoping to find a few reliable allies. What he didn't expect was that the first to arrive Saul had stumbled in purely by accident. But Saul's quick reflexes and rapid spellcasting had left quite an impression on him. That was why Klon had chosen to share information about the estate, hoping to establish a partnership. However, he just hadn't expected this kid to be in such a hurry. That only reinforced Klon's guess that Saul came from a wizard tower. Only those backed by major wizarding forces would carry themselves with such arrogance. Now that he had a promising partner, Klon didn't care about those small-time stragglers outside. All right then, let's go in now. Klon quickly packed up and, with his visibly nervous young apprentice in tow, followed Saul toward the estate's main gate. But Saul looked up at the gate, which rose even higher than the surrounding wall, then turned to Klon and said, "No need to split up after entering the estate. I'm going to climb over the wall over there and take a look." Figuring the areas outside the main building shouldn't be too dangerous, Klon nodded. "All right, then we'll meet in front of the castle in an hour." Saul nodded and temporarily parted ways with the two of them. He walked along the estate's wall, eyes locked on the rooftops that poked above it. After making it halfway around, he arrived at a spot where the top section of the wall had collapsed slightly, and he heard that strange sound again. This time it was clearer. It sounded like a string instrument, as if some lonely soul were absent-mindedly plucking at the strings. "This is the spot." Holding a scroll in his left hand, Saul slipped through the gap in the wall. The moment he landed, he stamped lightly on the ground to check beneath his feet, soft soil and thick weeds. Just then a few melodious notes rang out behind him, their sorrowful tune tugging at the heart. Saul frowned and turned to look up at the man standing atop the wall. "Victor, why are you playing music at a time like this? Get down here." A silver-haired young man stood atop the wall, harp in hand, gazing off into the distance. The wind tousled his fine, pale hair. His face wore a hint of melancholy, as though his heart were full of sorrow. An old wizarding family fallen into ruin. Before he'd even finished speaking, he plucked a string. The deep, melodic note echoed his lament. If this world has a main theme, it must be melancholy. His blue eyes shimmered with tears. Veins popped on Saul's forehead. His clenched fists trembled, and the scroll in his hand creaked under the pressure, ready to snap at any moment. Victor, we're here to steal something, not perform a damn opera. If you don't get down here right now, I swear I'll beat you. Victor's face was still full of sorrow, but he finally obeyed and leapt down from the wall, landing lightly beside Saul. Saul, is that any way to speak to your older brother? Saul seemed momentarily dazed, a bit lost. But the moment he saw Victor raise the harp again, fury surged back to the forefront of his mind. If you start singing again, I'll throw that damn harp away. Victor pouted, clutching his half-meter-tall wooden harp tightly to his chest. Seeing his brother act like that again, Saul sighed and waved dismissively. All right, let's just wait. I forgot where we were headed. HMPH. Victor lifted his chin. You said we were going to check out the garden. Right. Saul slapped his forehead, wondering how he'd suddenly forgotten. That garden looks like it might be the center of a formation. Be careful when we get there, don't wander off. If something dangerous shows up, just don't cause me any trouble. Even if I'm not a genius like you, I've been a second rank for years now. Saul sighed. It's not your strength I doubt, it's your brain. Victor froze, his expression slowly turning to disbelief. Saul, I've never met a little brother as mean as you. Not in the mood to argue, Saul waved him along and headed toward the garden in the front courtyard. I observed earlier, the center of this estate is in that garden. Strange, this front garden is awfully large. Victor followed obediently behind, but his eyes wandered all over, clearly not focused on where he was going. Maybe the estate's owner was a romantic gentleman who liked to stroll through the morning dew and evening breeze, savoring the scent of flowers. Or maybe he just needed space to dump all his so-called art. A garden this big makes it real convenient for burying bodies too. Saul passed a statue, tapping it as he walked. Solid, no trace of magic. Why would the owner place so many human sculptures? Saul looked up at another life-size statue, standing on a pedestal. This is art, little brother. Victor stood beneath it. Look at the fear on that face, so vivid, like the work of a true master. Saul stared at the statue's expression, wide eyes, gaping mouth, a twisted jaw. He felt no artistic flair, only a creeping sense of dread and horror. Be careful. Saul instinctively lowered his voice. I have a feeling these statues might have once been real people. It's just that too much time has passed and any lingering magic has faded. Really? Victor mimicked Saul and placed a hand on the sculpture. I don't feel any life left. Poor soul, even though they tried to run, they still couldn't escape fate's grip. Seeing Victor slip back into one of his moods, Saul rolled his eyes hard. No mechanisms, no traces of magic. Let's move on, the treasure's probably not here. They quickened their pace and entered deeper into the garden. The garden was vast, though long untended. Once precious flowers had withered, but wild blossoms bloomed brightly in the corners of the flower beds. The central point should be over there. Saul surveyed their surroundings again, mentally calculating before pointing to a spot in the garden. Victor followed behind, still looking around leisurely, with no intention of actually using his head. When the two of them reached the location Saul had estimated, they both stopped, frowning at the sight ahead. There was a ruined flower bed, its center dug out to form a large pit. Dirt had spilled all around, making it the messiest part of the whole garden. Crap, you think someone already dug up the treasure? Victor asked, sounding alarmed. Saul probed the surroundings but didn't sense any danger. Still clutching his soul armor spell scroll, he cautiously approached the pit. Though the area had been disturbed, the pit's shape was still discernible, It had once held something large and square. Looks like a coffin was buried here. Chapter 187, Human Shadows. Saul cast Gleamlight spell, illuminating the deep pit. At first glance, there were only weeds, roots, stones, and clumps of earth in the pit. But upon closer inspection, Saul spotted some tiny black crystals in the soil. They looked like rocks, easy to miss if not observed carefully. These are depleted magic crystal fragments. Saul picked up a shard no bigger than a pinky nail and held it up for Victor to see. Someone did use this estate to set up a magic formation, but the formation is buried underground. Unless we dig up this whole patch of earth, there's no way to restore its original form or determine its exact purpose. Victor took the shard and gently pinched it between his thumb and index finger. It crumbled into fine black dust, carried away by the wind. This pit isn't that deep, really. Deep enough to bury an ordinary person, but too shallow for sealing something. I'd guess this formation was meant to enhance or temporarily store something. Saul nodded. That was my thought as well. So, the person who lay in this pit was probably the one benefiting from the formation. But now the pit's empty. Victor glanced at Saul. Could the person have gotten out? Saul tossed aside another fragment and stood up, brushing off his knees. Maybe it's no longer useful, or maybe someone dug it up and ate it. Victor anxiously stroked the strings of his harp. We might have another competitor for the treasure. He reached out to pull Saul up, but gave up when he saw the dirt on Saul's hands. Don't worry. No matter how many enemies there are, your big brother will help you get the treasure. I'll make sure you reach 3rd rank. Saul looked at Victor's hand, reaching out then retracting and sighed helplessly before jumping out of the pit himself. Brushing the dirt off his hands, he spoke with feigned nonchalance. What nonsense are you talking about? With my talent, do I need treasures? You should be the one breaking through to 3rd rank first. You're almost 30. Don't suddenly get contamination one day. Victor didn't respond for a while. Curious, Saul glanced up, only to see Victor covering his mouth with one hand, a tear slipping from the corner of his eye. Boo-hoo, Saul actually cares so much about me. I'm so moved. Goosebumps rose all over Saul as he looked at Victor. How did he end up with a brother like this? Thanks, Saul, but your brother is just a mediocre man waiting for death to come. Let's not waste treasure on me. The once howling wind suddenly stopped. The sky grew darker, dusk giving way to the deep of night. Victor looked up. His expression was hidden in the gloom. A heavy rain's coming. We'd best take shelter inside. As he spoke, Victor plucked a string. Even its low tones rang out ethereal and pleasant. Saul was momentarily stunned, then nodded. All right, seems there's nothing else out here anyway. The two crossed the garden and walked straight to the castle entrance. Strangely, the grand door was already ajar. Looks like others have already visited. Saul turned and gestured to Victor's harp, signaling him to stay quiet, then turned and pushed the door open. The castle's front hall was dark. Scattered across the floor were toppled lamp stands, chairs, and other pieces of furniture. There seemed to be windows in the hall, but they were completely covered by heavy curtains. Saul scanned the room carefully. No figures, no corpses, no sense of being watched. Only then did he signal to the man behind him and step further into the castle. Victor almost followed Saul's footprints that had not disappeared. The moment both stepped inside, a flash of lightning streaked across the sky. Blinding white light poured in through the door and the gaps in the velvet curtains. And in that moment, Saul thought he saw a figure kneeling in the center of the hall, back turned to them. The man was in armor. It looked like a warrior. But as the lightning passed and the thunder rolled in, the figure vanished. Crash! Torrential rain poured down. Victor leapt forward, dodging the splashing raindrops. He touched the harp at his chest, visibly relieved. That was close. Then he noticed Saul standing frozen ahead. Curious, he circled around and waved a hand in front of Saul's face. "What's wrong, my unlucky little brother? Turned to stone." Saul snapped out of it, swatting Victor's hand away. "I just saw someone kneeling up ahead." Victor looked over, puzzled, but he saw nothing. Still, it didn't stop him from musing aloud. Perhaps a ghost, trapped in this ancient castle. No escape, begging you to free him from his fate. As he spoke, Victor's fingers once again brushed the strings of his harp. But then he remembered Saul's warning and forced himself not to play a note. "Begging me for help," Saul sneered. "I came to steal." He found the wrong guy. Cautiously, Saul approached the spot where he'd seen the figure. Narrowing his eyes, he activated semi-immersive meditation to examine the area again. Still, the floor was empty. Gone, or not a spirit at all. Saul's expression grew grim. He was just about to warn Victor to stay alert, when another flash of lightning lit up the sky, so bright it turned night into day. Saul quickly looked down again, and was stunned to see countless kneeling figures filling the hall. Even beneath his own feet and where Victor stood, someone knelt. "Gah!" Saul lowered his gaze and met a face. That face had no eyes, no nose, no ears, only a gaping mouth. The scarred corners of its lips quivered and twisted, as if pleading for help. But the next second, with a peal of thunder, the figures vanished once more. Bang! The front door slammed open as two people burst inside, fleeing the rain. "This rain's not right," the shorter one cried, clawing at his soaked face and neck, his fingertips already stained red. The other figure was taller. Saul saw an old man with white hair. The man chanted a spell to clean the rain off himself, then tidied up the little boy beside him. Victor stood not far from them, smiling faintly as though waiting for them to notice. "Who?" The old man finally spotted Victor. He grabbed the boy by the collar and backed away to the other end of the hall. Victor didn't retaliate, just playfully moved to stand behind Saul. "And who might you be?" The old man finally noticed Saul standing in the center of the hall, his guard rising. "Just sheltering from the rain," Saul replied, just as wary. The little boy didn't stand out, though now his face was covered in blood, twisted in pain. The white-haired old man wasn't ordinary. The magical pulse from his earlier spell hinted at the strength of a third-rank apprentice. The old man furrowed his nose at Saul's lie, but didn't call him out on it. His gaze shifted between Saul and Victor a few times before he smiled. "Oh, then it seems we share the same purpose. But you're luckier than us, didn't get caught in the rain." He casually walked to a nearby window, lifted the curtain, and glanced outside. "This rain doesn't feel right, it stings and itches on contact." He let the curtain fall. "Not surprising, though. This is Ralph Manor, not the best place to take shelter." "Well, since we're here, we might as well wait out the storm." Saul nodded at him. "Please rest here, we'll head farther in." He grabbed the still curious Victor and prepared to cross the hall and explore deeper into the castle. That old man was likely third rank. Saul and Victor were both second rank. It wouldn't go well if things got rough. The old man didn't stop them, just watched silently. But the little boy tugged his sleeve in frustration. "Teacher, are we just going to let them go in first?" The white-haired wizard pressed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "No rush, Swan. Let them take the first look." Chapter 188, Disarray. Pushing through the entrance hall and opening a slightly shaky door, Saul kept alert for any movement from the old wizard as he stepped into the next room. "It's so dark in here, Saul. Can't we light a lamp?" Victor had followed him in and now looked around the even dimmer room with a troubled expression. Saul rolled his eyes in the darkness, wishing he could toss Victor out into the rain to snap his mind out of it. But just as he took a step forward, the entire room suddenly lit up. Saul froze, then turned his head to the side in alarm. The curtains in the room had been neatly drawn aside, revealing rectangular windows and a beautiful garden beyond. Sunlight streamed in through the windows. Saul frowned deeply. Is this an illusion or a temporal spatial distortion? He turned to ask Victor, but to his shock, no one was behind him. The door had also silently shut. Saul hurriedly reached out and twisted the doorknob. It opened smoothly. None of that classic horror movie nonsense with locked doors. Beyond it was the very entrance hall he had just passed through. But now the hall was brightly lit as well. Sunlight streamed in through windows on either side. There were no dark clouds or heavy rain anywhere. He could even see motes of dust dancing in the air. Yet the hall was completely empty. No Victor, no sign of the elderly man or the boy who had come in later. Victor, Saul called his brother's name in a hushed voice. No response. His grip on the doorknob tightened, and the metal handle began to groan under the pressure, warping out of shape. Spatial dislocation, temporal chaos. How could such phenomena occur in a place once occupied only by true wizards? That guy should still be where we split up, Saul muttered. He wasn't overly worried about Victor. Victor had been a second-rank wizard apprentice for many years now. He should be fine. Wandering blindly probably won't lead me to Victor. I might as well look for the treasure first. Maybe I can break this illusionary maze. Saul's eyes shifted, talking to himself. Yeah, I must find the treasure first. Bang! Just as Saul turned to leave, the front doors of the hall were violently shoved open. A towering warrior clad in armor barged in with several subordinates. Their eyes landed on Saul immediately. There's someone alive here. The warrior narrowed his eyes, his longsword already half drawn. Captain, could it be a wraith? One of the soldiers asked. Doesn't matter if it's living or undead, the warrior said, walking straight toward Saul. Saul didn't back away. He too was assessing whether they were wraiths. Who are you? You think it's your place to ask questions, kid? One of the soldiers sneered and suddenly pulled out a vial, ready to hurl it at Saul. But a large hand clamped down on the soldier's wrist and the vial, that same towering warrior in armor. I'm Olaf, Knight of Viscount Buck of Highland, and you are? Saul didn't answer right away. He tilted his head slightly, staring at the soldier who had nearly thrown the vial at him. He'd seen that face just moments ago. They had locked eyes up close. Though that face had been missing eyes and a nose, Saul distinctly remembered the scar at the corner of his mouth. Bastard, our captain's talking to you. Saul's silence was starting to irritate the other soldiers. But Olaf remained still, his expression growing increasingly grim. What day is it? Saul suddenly asked, cutting off the soldier's angry retort. The strange question stunned the soldiers. Olaf responded in a low voice, It's May 14th. So half a month ago then. Now the soldiers were thoroughly confused. Some even muttered, Did we just run into a lunatic? Did you just enter the Ralph estate? Saul asked again. His bizarre demeanor quieted even the rowdiest soldier. They all looked at him in surprise. Olaf lowered his hand slightly and stepped forward. We did just enter under orders from the Viscount, but who are you? When did you come in? But before he could finish, a massive translucent hand suddenly reached toward them. Olaf rolled away instantly. The hand missed him but snatched up the soldier who had tried to throw the vial. A wizard. Olaf instinctively dodged, but he wasn't relieved. Instead, his eyes filled with fear as he looked at Saul. Wizard, sir. The captured soldier was terrified. The arrogance vanished from his face, replaced with panic as he begged for mercy. I didn't mean to. Please have mercy. The mage hand brought him before Saul, then dropped him on the ground. The soldier lay trembling on the floor, too afraid to get up. Saul crouched and took the vial from the soldier's fingertips. It was cold and felt entirely real, not like an illusion. With a flick of his hand, Saul conjured an arrow that pierced the soldier's palm and nailed it to the stone floor. Ahhh! The man howled in pain, writhing uncontrollably. Blood welled from the wound and dripped to the ground. The blood looks real too, not like an illusion. If this wasn't an illusion, it was even more troubling. Saul's brief display of power left the soldiers shaken to their core. This place had been abandoned for 2 years. The wizard tower hadn't sent anyone to oversee it, and wandering wizards rarely ventured so close to a wizard tower. They never expected to run into another wizard here. Their tightly gripped swords trembled in their hands, but not one dared to lift them. In this world, who would dare to oppose a wizard? Unless they had an even stronger one on their side. "It was our fault, my lord." Olaf lowered his head and sheathed his sword, the tip resting on the ground. "We simply didn't expect to find you here. If we've offended you, please forgive David this once." Saul tossed the vial and caught it again. "What is this?" Olaf pressed his lips into a thin line. "It's holy oil enchanted with spell. It can harm spirits to some degree." Saul uncorked the bottle and peeked inside before resealing it. A shoddy magical product, not even worthy of being called a proper magical tool. There were a few particles of light element inside, likely meant to exploit the natural opposition between light and dark to dispel weaker spirits. Useless against wraiths, especially in a situation this twisted. And if these people really had entered half a month ago, unless they'd brought plenty of rations, they should all be dead by now. With that in mind, Saul waved a hand and dismissed the spell. David flinched and clutched his wound, but still didn't dare get up. "Olaf, come here." The knight stiffened, swallowing hard. He sheathed his sword fully to show no hostility, then nervously stepped forward. "Turn around," Saul ordered. Olaf obeyed, not knowing what Saul intended. Staring at Olaf's back, Saul finally confirmed. This was the same man he'd seen kneeling in the entrance hall earlier, before entering the castle. Because they had already died in the entrance hall, he was now seeing their past. "You come with me, and you too." Saul pointed at Olaf and the prone David. Olaf helped David up. They exchanged a grim look but dared not hesitate, quickly following Saul. Passing through the inner door, Saul once again entered the bright adjoining room, this time consciously watching the two behind him. But the moment he stepped into the room and took another step forward, Olaf and David vanished again. Even with his semi-immersive meditative state, Saul hadn't detected a single fluctuation. His heart tensed, and then the world dimmed. Rain pounded against the windows, crackling loudly. He returned to the Ralph estate half a month later. Saul closed his eyes for a moment, the holy oil bottle in his hand still cold and tangible. Chapter 189, Awakening. Saul had returned to the proper timeline. "Victor," he called out, searching for his brother. But once again, no one answered. Saul made his way back to the main hall. It was empty. The large doors stood wide open, and rainwater had already pooled over the tiles by the entrance. The doors swayed back and forth, like a trembling, restless soul. Lightning flashed, and in that stark white light, Saul once more saw the knight kneeling on the floor. This time, he saw the man's face clearly. It was, as expected, Olaf. This Olaf was not nearly as composed as he had been half a month ago. His face was stricken with panic, and blood ran from his eyes and nostrils, dripping onto his dulled armor. But compared to David, at least his features were still intact. What did they run into? And Victor, who knows where he ran off to? Even after returning to the present, Saul still hadn't seen his brother. He was getting worried. "I should be the one asking where you ran off to," said a familiar voice from behind him. Saul turned around to see Victor thudding down the stairs. Victor ran up to him and circled around once. Confirming there were no wounds on Saul, he let out a sigh of relief. Where did you go? One flash of lightning and you vanished. Don't tell me this place has some kind of magic trap. I was suddenly sent back half a month ago. I don't know if it was an illusion or an actual space-time distortion. I even saw the squad of soldiers who entered this place back then. Space-time distortion. That's impossible, right? Even a third-rank wizard couldn't pull that off. Victor waved the harp in his hand. Maybe we should just leave. This place is way too dangerous. Maybe that treasure just isn't meant for us. The treasure, Saul muttered, thinking it over. No, it's not time to give up yet. Even if time's distorted, I haven't run into any real danger. Victor looked at his brother with sorrowful eyes. Silly brother, what treasure could possibly be more important than your life? Even so, Saul showed no intention of turning back. He'd come too far to give up before finding the treasure. What's that in your hand? Victor pointed to the small vial Saul was gripping tightly. Saul raised it to show him. It belonged to the soldiers. They called it holy water, supposed to have some effect on common spirits. Victor glanced at it. Cheap stuff, not even half as useful as a single holy light spell. Poor fools. They didn't even know what they were facing, marching into a den of wolves with weapons made of straw. Why are you keeping it? If we run into a spirit, I want to test it. You want to see if it was all just a hallucination. Not exactly, Saul explained. This stuff isn't stable, it evaporates easily, and normal people don't have the proper storage methods. If this really is what the Knights brought in half a month ago, it should have lost its effect by now. But if it has... Victor's eyes lit with realization. Then it means you really brought something back from half a month ago. Which would make this place terrifying, Saul muttered, licking his dry lips and lowering his voice. Though he said it was terrifying, Saul still had no intention of backing out. Where did you go just now? Why'd you come down from upstairs? When you vanished, I went straight back to the room we were in. That old wizard and the boy were there too. When they heard you were missing, they kindly helped me search. But we split up, so I don't know where they are now. HMPH, helping search, yeah right. They're just after the treasure, Saul snapped, immediately on alert. He gave Victor a shove. Let's hurry upstairs too, we can't let anyone else get to it first. The two arrived at the staircase opposite the room. The stairs were made of stone, with a red velvet carpet stretching from the upper floor down to the hall. But after years of neglect, the once vibrant carpet had faded. Climbing the stairs, they entered a spacious corridor. One side of it opened onto a wide, semicircular balcony. Through tightly shut floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see flowers on the balcony being ravaged by the wind and rain. Thunder crashed, and for a split second, Saul saw a slender figure tumble from the balcony railing. It didn't leap, it fell. Head first. Seeing Saul stop and stare toward the balcony, Victor also paused. What is it? I think Saul shook his head. No, it's nothing, let's keep looking. On the other side of the corridor was a row of rooms. The doors were carved with intricate patterns, though the locks appeared damaged. I don't know if my treasure is hidden in one of these rooms. Let's split up and search, Saul suggested. Victor hesitated. What if you disappear again? Even if we stick together, if time going to disorder, it'll be a disorder either way. Saul spread his hands. Victor fell silent. Only after a clap of thunder made them both glance toward the windows did he finally relent. All right, let's split up. Saul nodded and entered one of the rooms in the middle of the corridor. He looked around but found nothing. When he came out, he saw Victor still standing expressionlessly in the hallway. What is it? Saul asked in confusion. Victor's face broke into a smile. Nothing, just checking if my poor brother would disappear again. With that, he stepped into the room beside Saul. Saul waited until Victor went in before heading into another room further down. Once inside, he gently pulled the door mostly shut, leaving only a sliver open. He leaned against the wall, suppressing his breathing, and exhaled a long, shaky breath. His pupils trembled, and the cold sweat he'd been holding back started to prickle out through his pores. He took several deep breaths, trying to suppress his body's instinctive fear. "This Victor," he muttered, swallowing hard. "Who the hell is he?" He glanced to his left shoulder before quickly straightening. "There's no mention of him in the diary. Somehow, I ended up being brothers with Victor, and when I saw Wizard Klon earlier, I didn't even remember meeting him before. Is this all the Manor's doing, or is someone manipulating things behind the scenes? Could it be Seed's grandfather, Ralph? Is he the threat the Tower Master warned about?" About 10 minutes ago, when Saul climbed over the wall of Ralph's manor and landed on the soft grass, his entire perception had suddenly shifted. He'd believed that he'd entered the manor to steal something incredibly important to him. But aside from feeling that the treasure was precious, Saul had no idea what it was. Like a drowning man grasping at a straw, desperate for something to hold onto, but unsure of what that was. What scared him most was that he had come to believe that he had been traveling with an experienced second-rank apprentice named Victor. Someone he'd never even met before was his biological brother. It was laughable. At first, Saul didn't notice anything was off. Not until he entered the sun-drenched hall for the first time did he begin to realize something was wrong. He had not only forgotten his true purpose here, but even his own identity. He was here to clean up the trouble Seed had left behind, and to look for clues about the diary of a dead wizard. Remembering the name of the diary was what gradually brought his distorted consciousness and memory back into alignment. But what about Victor? Was he the source of all this confusion, or just another victim like Saul? "Saul!" Victor's voice rang out from the corridor just then. Saul stood and casually walked around the room. "What is it?" "Nothing, just checking if my poor brother had vanished." Maintaining his usual tone and expression, Saul stepped out and waved at Victor, who stood a short distance away, watching him. "Let's go. The sooner we find the treasure, the sooner we can get out of this damned place." Chapter 190, Rules. Being rejected by Saul, Victor actually smiled. "Don't worry. Even if your big brother is stuck in this cursed place forever, I'll still help you find the treasure." Saul resisted the urge to roll his eyes and slipped into the next room. The moment he pushed the door open, his vision suddenly brightened. Sunlight poured into the room, and the windows were wide open. The sheer curtains billowed high in the wind. There were 3 people in the room, 1 woman and 2 men. All of them were huddled in a corner with looks of sheer terror. As Saul stepped inside, one of them instinctively pulled the trigger of the crossbow in his hands. Whoosh! Whip crack! Before Saul could even react, a black tentacle flashed into view like lightning, opening a gaping black mouth and biting down on the arrow. Little Algae had popped out of nowhere, crunching the arrow to pieces in a few quick bites before spitting it out with a tui a moment later. Although the arrowhead it spat out was already deformed, Saul could still see the faint dark green sheen glinting on the metal. "Poisoned." Saul glanced down, then looked up and fixed his gaze on the 3 people. They returned his stare with expressions of hopeless despair. 2 of them turned and bolted for the open window, while the woman reacted even more dramatically. She dove under the bed. Did she think Saul was too bulky to chase her in there? Saul cast a glance at the woman's foot still sticking out, and instead walked over to the window to check on the 2 men who had jumped. But after they leapt, he didn't hear any landing sounds. This was the 2nd floor. Judging by their gear, the 2 were probably adventurers. This height shouldn't have posed any difficulty. Saul rested a hand on the windowsill and looked down. Outside was a garden bathed in dazzling sunlight, and directly below was a neatly trimmed, lush green lawn. but there was no sign of the two men. With his level of hearing, Saul should have caught something, even if they had somehow slipped into another room midair. Yet the silence was unnaturally complete, as though the two had never existed. Did they traverse time and space too? Saul lingered by the window for a moment. It can't be that simple. If it were that easy to traverse time and space, then tower masters capable of teleportation wouldn't be so feared as elite second-tier wizards. He stepped away from the window and began carefully inspecting every detail of the room, trying to find any clue that would explain this warped time-space situation. As he searched, his eyes fell on a foot sticking out from under the bed. Ah, the foolish woman! Saul walked over, grabbed the slender ankle and gave it a sharp yank. But instead of pulling her out, he got nothing but the ankle. The woman who had crawled under the bed had vanished, leaving behind a severed foot with an uneven cut, as though something had eaten her. Frowning, Saul casually tossed aside the still bleeding foot. Jumping out the window makes you disappear. Crawling under the bed does the same. Did they act so decisively because they feared me or because they've figured out the rules for traversing this time-space situation? Saul squatted to peer under the bed, then cast a glance back at the window. Finally, he chose to leave through the main door. Outside was still the spacious corridor, but now illuminated by sunlight streaming in from the balcony opposite, making it feel much brighter and lacking the eerie atmosphere of the rainy world. It was as if the world had been torn in two. One half a stormy world of thunder, lightning, and oppressive clouds. The other, a sunny world of clear skies and gentle breezes. My first time crossing between the rainy and sunny worlds was something like this. The first time I walked through a door, I entered the sunny world. The second time through that door, I was still in the sunny world, and I saw the knight who just entered. But the third time I was back in the rainy world. Using both his eyes and his spirit perception, Saul still couldn't spot any flaws. It was likely that the rules of this place were stronger than his current power level. Breaking through by brute force would probably be extremely difficult. Does walking through a door really allow you to switch between worlds? If I hadn't walked through the same door a third time but picked another room instead, would I still have returned to the rainy world? The rainy world had that mysterious victor. Saul wasn't sure of his strength or motives, so he wasn't eager to reunite with his brother just yet. He decided to continue down the corridor. He didn't bother entering any more rooms. Whatever he was looking for probably wouldn't be in those places. Eventually, he reached the end of the hallway and came to a stop before a spiral staircase. This staircase wasn't connected to the one he had used earlier to ascend, but it also had a path downward, which seemed to lead to another section of the first floor. Ralph's castle wasn't all that grand, probably 4 stories tall, with the tallest tower maybe reaching 6 stories at most. Saul stood on the steps, hesitating between going up or down. Better ask someone with experience. He bowed his head and called to the diary in his mind. "Brother Diary, could you summon Lord Morden for me?" The diary flew out and flipped straight to the final black page. Ever since it had absorbed the consciousness of Morden, the second-tier wizard, Saul would occasionally ask him about general knowledge, not anything too specialized, for fear that gaining knowledge too far beyond his level might bring unwanted consequences. In fact, it was Bill's consciousness that had given Saul much of his everyday guidance during study. But both Bill and Herman of the Land Drifters were merely third-rank apprentices, and their consciousnesses were fading quickly. After Saul's rigorous experiments, their handwriting had grown as thin as hair. He no longer dared consult them, afraid a single mistake might wipe out a whole black page. Only Morden still had enough spiritual energy left. But unfortunately, after becoming a wraith for so long, much of his knowledge had faded. "Lord Morden, have you heard of the Bloodthorn family?" Bloodthorn, never heard of them. I do recall the Bloodrose family, though. They were loyal vassals who fought alongside me in the Battle of Hanging Hand Valley. Oh wait, Bloodthorn might be a side branch of the Bloodrose. The Battle of Hanging Hand Valley. Never mind, probably a total wipeout. Maybe the Bloodthorn family's decline started when the Bloodroses fell. Lord Morden, do you know how the Bloodthorn family rose to prominence? A family that could inherit the diary of dead wizard, even if they never figured out its true secrets, shouldn't have been as obscure as Morden made them out to be. How would I bother remembering something so minor? But Bloodthorn, right? They were known for their blood and flesh magic within the dark element. HMPH, can't recall exactly. Am I really getting old? Why can't I remember so many things anymore? I used to remember even the tiniest detail with crystal clarity. Saul wanted to tell Morden, "You're not old, you're dead." But he'd never told any of the diary's residents that they were already dead in the real world. There was no need, and Saul was afraid the knowledge might shatter their consciousnesses. What is blood and flesh magic? Heh, it's just a bandit's path to fortune. Devour your own kind, extract their essence, and use it to boost your power. But such wizardry has dangerous side effects. You can't devour anything outside your own species. If you do, you might forget you were ever human. That didn't sound related to the diary of a dead wizard at all. If blood and flesh magic was just a bandit's shortcut, maybe the diary of a dead wizard wasn't originally the Bloodthorn family's legacy. Maybe they stole it. In that case, Lord Morden, if you had to guess, where in their residence would the Bloodthorn family most likely build their most important lab? Blood and flesh wizardly, that's dark element stuff. Naturally, the deeper underground the better. Underground, Saul murmured. This castle's time-space was all jumbled, but the locations of the rooms seemed unchanged. Ralph's lab might still be in the underground. Saul looked down the staircase. Below was a small parlor with areas outside his line of sight. There might be more rooms and passageways down there. As Saul pondered his next move, suddenly a hand clapped down on his shoulder. "Saul, so this is where you were." Saul froze and turned quickly, only to see Victor leaning down from the floor above, peering at him from the stairs. "Brother, you made it to the sunny world too." Chapter 191, Spiritual Field. "You call this place the sunny world?" Victor withdrew his hand but couldn't resist touching the harp strings again. "That name's rather plain. Maybe I should give it something a bit more poetic. How about yesterday once more?" As he spoke, Victor gently plucked a string. Twang! Saul didn't understand music, but he found the mix of high and low notes rather pleasant. He suddenly asked urgently, "Victor, did you find the treasure?" Victor's fingers froze on the strings. No, not yet." Saul let out a sigh. "That old wizard and the boy came in with us. What if they found it before we did?" "They won't," Victor said firmly. "Even if they did, I'll help you take it back." "But that old guy is a third-rank apprentice." "Don't worry," Victor promised. "Even if I have to risk my life, your big brother will get the treasure for you." Saul got goosebumps just looking at Victor's expression. "We should split up, that way we'll search faster." But this time, Victor disagreed. "I already searched this floor and the one below, nothing worthwhile." He grabbed Saul's arm and dragged him up the stairs. "Let's go upstairs." Victor was surprisingly strong. Before Saul could react, he was already being pulled up the stairs, unable to resist at all. This guy might not be just a second-rank apprentice. If I want to uncover the diary's secret, I have to shake him off. Just as Saul was plotting how to ditch Victor, he suddenly froze. Victor noticed Saul wasn't moving and reached out to pull him along again, heading up the stairs. Saul instinctively tried to resist, but then relaxed and followed Victor up. His gaze kept shifting between the space ahead and Victor's back. and his expression gradually grew calm. Just as the two reached the landing between the second and third floors, a group of figures appeared before them. They looked like seasoned mercenaries, lean and practical, but were in utter disarray, crouching and peering cautiously upstairs, as if they were hiding from something. Victor stepped onto the next stair, his shoe tapping dully against the carpet-covered stone. The mercenaries upstairs turned instantly, wide-eyed and tense. One might have thought they'd relax seeing just two men coming up the stairs, but instead, their expressions twisted further in fear, as if terror itself was about to drip from their faces. They scrambled upstairs in a frenzy, as if Saul and Victor were monsters out of a nightmare. In the blink of an eye, the 4 or 5 men who had just been on the stairs were gone without a trace. Saul and Victor stood still. Saul looked at Victor suspiciously. "What did you do to them?" Victor raised his harp to shield his face. "I didn't even see them when I came down." Recalling the looks and movements of the group, Saul suddenly turned to look down the stairs. Victor stood beside him, eyes following Saul. There was no one on the staircase, yet Saul seemed to see something. He ran back down a few steps. Then he turned again and looked up the stairs. "What are you doing?" Victor asked, curious. Saul stopped, paused a few seconds, then slowly said, "No wonder they didn't see me. They didn't see you either." Victor was momentarily stunned, and his expression toward Saul shifted subtly. Saul continued. Their eyes were fixed on this spot. He pointed to the stairs beneath his feet. "Which means, what truly frightened them wasn't us but someone or something that had just appeared here." "But we just walked up from there," Victor said, turning around with one hand on the railing and the other holding his harp. "I used to think the shift between rainy and sunny weather was due to us moving between different timelines, allowing us to encounter people from the past. But for a fallen family whose strongest member was only a first-tier true wizard, manipulating time is a bit of a stretch." Victor's smile faded. He raised a hand, fingers hooked around a harp string, ready to pluck it at any moment. "Then what's the real reason?" Saul looked at Victor, one hand supporting his chin, the other crossed beneath his elbow, eyes drifting over the surrounding architecture. "Spirits. A lot of people died here, but for some reason their souls didn't dissipate. They gathered in this castle instead. The spirits of ordinary people are usually very weak, but when there are enough of them, and under the influence of something, they form a spiritual field strong enough to affect consciousness." Victor's lips curled into a smile again, but this time it carried a strange edge. "Some kind of influence. Then that must be the treasure we're after." He reached a hand toward Saul. "Come, my clever little brother. I think the treasure you're looking for is waiting upstairs. With it, you could advance to 3rd rank and even become a powerful true wizard." Saul stared hard at him but didn't move. "There's still one thing I don't understand." "Overthinking won't help, sometimes. You just have to take action. If we keep wasting time, that old man and his apprentice might get to it first," Victor said as his fingers slid over the strings. "In a castle like this, the most important places are the master's chambers and the hidden rooms. Especially the hidden rooms, they take time to find. We may not have much of it." "No, searching blindly is the real waste of time," Saul said with certainty. He even closed his eyes, replaying everything they'd experienced in the castle. They entered the castle. Heavy rain fell. They saw the kneeling knight and the faceless man. The old wizard and his apprentice entered and commented on the strange rain. Saul and Victor, heading toward another room, entered the sunny world. Saul returned alone to the front hall and saw Olaf and David, who had entered the castle half a month earlier. When he tried to take Olaf and David with him, the two vanished, but the holy oil they handed him remained. He saw Victor coming down from upstairs. They went to a guest room on the 2nd floor and entered the sunny world again, meeting 3 mercenaries. The mercenaries vanished as they fled, leaving only a foot bitten clean off by something. Exploring further in the sunny world, Saul saw Victor coming down the stairs again. The two of them appeared together in the sunny world. Then they saw more mercenaries going upstairs, dressed differently from the previous 3. But the fear on their faces was the same. I kept thinking they were afraid of me and trying to attack me. Saul slowly opened his eyes. But aside from Olaf and David, none of the others even spoke to me. Was it that they didn't want to talk to this suddenly appearing Saul, or that, in the eyes of those mercenaries from the past, the ones who appeared at the door or on the stairs were enemies beyond communication? So maybe I didn't meet the dead. I only saw their final moments right before death. That's why the figure jumping out the window vanished instantly, and the person hiding under the bed was devoured, leaving behind only a foot, bitten clean off. Chapter 192. I fainted totally faked. Victor mimicked Saul's pose, resting his chin on his hand. So, what we've been seeing was all an illusion. Life and death meeting again and again on the wheel of fate. What a tragically beautiful encounter. He strolled up and down the stair steps, gently swaying his harp as if lost in a melody of his own imagination. When our mental fluctuations synchronize with the spiritual field and the spirits here, we see a sunny day. But once we fall out of sync, it returns to rain. Tusk. Victor stopped, leaned back against the stair railing, and suddenly bent backward, his upper body hanging nearly 90 degrees over the edge as he stared up at the spiraling staircase and the distant ceiling. I really do love stories like this, so romantic. He straightened up again with ease, turned his head to the right and looked at Saul. But didn't you say you spoke to one of those knights who disappeared for half a month? If what you saw was just a vision of the past, how could you take part in it? Don't tell me those knights happened to meet a wizard just like you, saying exactly the same things. That's why I was misled at first, thinking I had traveled through time, Saul said, his mind flashing back to the hall of the castle filled with people kneeling. I really was communicating with someone. So naturally, I thought those mercenaries were afraid of me. The more convinced I became that I'd entered the past, the deeper I got drawn into it, unable to escape. Ah, Victor clapped his hands. If we can see the past, then we might be able to follow their footsteps and find out how they died. That has to be connected to the secret of this castle. He nodded toward the upper stairs. We've done enough thinking. It's time to seek the truth. Don't you want to know what happened to those mercenaries after they went up there? Now that we understand the spiritual field, we're prepared. We won't be swayed so easily again, right? Saul dropped his gaze briefly, then lifted it again with a sharp exhale. There's one last question we need to answer before we go up. What? Saul pulled out a small porcelain vial from his coat. Remember what that knight gave me. Why hasn't it disappeared? If I can't figure that out, I don't dare go further. Who knows whether the next thing that attacks will be real or just another illusion? Seeing that Saul was still unwilling to move forward, Victor's face flashed with a hint of impatience. He glanced at the item in Saul's hand. You mean this holy oil? Maybe you picked it up off the ground after seeing the illusion. As long as we keep our mental bodies stable, we shouldn't. Saul suddenly burst into a snicker. Brother, didn't I tell you that it was called holy water? Victor narrowed his eyes. Saul shook the little porcelain bottle. The liquid inside sloshed with a low, heavy sound. So this potion, you slipped it into my hand on purpose, didn't you? Victor finally cracked. He lowered his head, shoulders shaking with laughter. Everyone facing a wizard always assumes the worst. I'm not surprised you guessed something. What I don't understand is how you figured out the truth about the time-space illusion after just 2 synchronizations. And you even exposed me twice. Twice? Saul blinked in confusion, but before he could react, Victor suddenly strummed the harp that had been silent for so long. A haunting melody filled the air. Saul's eyes began to glaze over. He still seemed to struggle, his pupils flicking between Victor and the empty space in front of him. Victor's fingers danced across the strings, then gently pressed down, cutting the music off mid-note. He looked up, face full of conflicted emotion. Well now, it seems my dear little brother has reached the age where he plays tricks on his big brother. I'll miss you, really. But the real show, the one prepared by the Lord of the Manor, is about to begin. As uninvited guests, we can't skip the grand finale. So, lightning split the sky, cutting through the darkness. Without warning, the world shifted once again. The rain returned. Victor still stood on the stairs. Saul remained several steps below. Victor's face lost all trace of emotion. He smiled gently, released the strings, and held out his right hand toward Saul. "My dear brother, do you still remember why you came here?" "For," Saul muttered dazedly, finding something, solving a problem. Victor clicked his tongue, still so tight-lipped. "Let's go find your precious thing, then. You remember that old wizard and the little boy from earlier?" Saul slowly nodded. "They've already gone ahead, much more eager than you. If you don't move soon, you'll fall behind." Saul's face grew confused. He raised his hands, clutching at his cheeks helplessly. "But I feel like I've forgotten something important." Clang! A loud crash rang out from above. Both Victor and Saul looked up. The noise seemed to jolt Saul back to awareness. Victor saw this and quickly plucked the strings again. Saul's clarity faded once more. Victor played while speaking quickly. "Naughty little brother, look, someone found your treasure. Hurry. If you don't go now, what was once yours will be snatched away." Saul, just as Victor had hoped, showed an anxious expression and began to move, his pace quickening. His gaze drifted past Victor toward the top of the spiral staircase. That crash from before, it had come from there. Victor's brows furrowed with urgency too. "We need to go faster, faster." But just as Victor's performance was reaching its peak, Saul, now dashing forward, suddenly threw something at him and simultaneously leapt from the staircase with a powerful push of his left leg. Victor was stunned. He tried to dodge, only to see the object explode in midair. Shards of metal burst outward, several embedding themselves in Victor's body. Unprepared and too late to cast a spell, he instinctively shielded his harp with his body. Victor looked up at Saul, now on the ground floor, his eyes full of disbelief. "You broke free." Blood streaked Victor's silver hair and dripped onto the floor. A cut ran across his face. Saul said nothing, simply staring at the bleeding figure. The iron and fire explosive hadn't performed optimally in such an open space, but it was the best chance Saul had to strike Victor at close range. Black tendrils erupted from the back of Saul's neck, lashing toward the bloodied Victor like a storm. Victor's narrowed eyes lit up with astonishment. "So you were acting just now?" Even as he spoke, his hands never stopped. He dodged while swiftly plucking his harp. A sharp, fierce melody rang out. The air shimmered with sonic tremors. Most of the tendrils were sliced to pieces before they could reach him, writhing as they hit the ground. But a few got through and closed in on Victor. Victor suddenly opened his mouth and let out a deep shout. From afar, Saul felt a violent ringing in his ears. His mental body trembled uncontrollably. Little Algy's tendrils lost their strength, going limp midair. They barely touched Victor's body before losing all effectiveness. A few remaining tendrils draped over Victor from momentum alone. With a twist of his body, he shook them off effortlessly. Chapter 193, Caught Between Advance and Retreat. Victor let out a breath, looking a bit disheveled. His gaze swept over the tangled mass of black tendrils on the floor and then to Saul, who was crouched on the first floor with both hands clamped over his ears. He couldn't help but sigh in admiration. How interesting. Supporting himself with the railing and clutching his harp, Victor strolled downward at a leisurely pace. As a second-rank apprentice, Saul, you've truly surprised me. Even though I'm merely, well, of all the ordinary people and wizard apprentices who have come here, you're the only one able to break free of my musical drama repeatedly. Victor smoothed his hair, which had become a bit tousled during the recent evasive maneuver. Ignoring the blood on his body, he returned to being that somewhat melancholic and handsome man. Just then, a loud rumble echoed from upstairs, one after another, suggesting that a fierce battle was raging above. Victor quickened his speech. What a pity. I don't have the time to satisfy my curiosity. Whatever the reason may be, your mental aptitude must be terrifyingly high. That's wonderful. Saul still didn't respond, keeping his hands over his ears. Victor wasn't surprised. He stepped over the black tendrils sprawled across the stairs. Ah, I forgot. You must be exhausted right now. That long note I played just now is called a lullaby. Not the most elegant piece, but usually quite effective. By now, you should be limp, weak, and just wanting to sleep. No need to resist sleep, and there will be nothing left to fear. But just as Victor finished speaking, Saul suddenly lifted his knees high twice on the spot. Victor! This time his expression truly changed. In astonishment, he said, "Impossible. Even if you covered your ears, there's no way to block the long note." Saul tilted his head slightly, so Victor could see his left ear. From within it, a trace of bright red blood was trickling out. "You actually deafen yourself." Saul straightened his head and said, in a voice slightly louder than usual, "So don't bother talking too fast. I'm not great at reading lips. If you speak too quickly, I won't understand." Victor's breath hitched, his chest rising and falling sharply, cracks appearing in his usual elegant and somber demeanor. Only when another crash echoed from upstairs did he finally calm down, speaking slowly. "So this long note still needs adjustment. It's only good for ambushes, not for direct confrontations." Saul nodded. "That speaking pace is fine." Victor snorted. "Do you really think not being able to hear means you've escaped my attacks?" "Of course not," Saul replied cooperatively. "You're clearly stronger than just a second rank." Victor smiled, not denying it. "You've really given me quite a few surprises today, but this is as far as you go. Some beautiful music. No matter if your ears are deaf, your skull split open, or your flesh rotting, you can still hear it because your soul loves to sing." Victor opened his mouth slightly, but what came out was a hoarse rasp. He raised his hand to his throat and exhaled slowly. The breath he exhaled crystallized into white frost the moment it touched the air. Seeing the mist from Victor's lips and the ice spreading from his neck across his body, the heavy weight on Saul's chest finally lightened a little. Victor tried to speak again, but no sound came out. He looked down and saw the limp, scattered black tendrils on the ground. Each tendril tip was covered in tiny frost crystals. At high speed, even Victor couldn't discern the traps embedded in them. "Frosty Dutch." His trembling voice was barely audible. Saul could only roughly guess what he was saying from his lip movements. Now that Saul was deaf, Victor's harp could no longer deceive him. And now that Victor was mute, he could no longer use his voice to attack Saul. With offense and defense both neutralized, Saul had finally eliminated the vast gap between him and Victor. Victor's most terrifying trait lay in the beguiling nature of his musical theatrics. Saul had never encountered such wizardry before. That's why, when they first met, he had no way to resist and was dragged into Victor's rhythm. Now, with Victor frozen stiff, Saul swung his right hand, releasing several translucent worms toward him. Victor struggled to move his frozen body, managing to dodge the worms. But the black tendrils on the ground immediately slithered up and bound him tightly, wrapping him like a half-mummified figure. Only his eyes remained visible. It reminded Saul a little of Gorsa. Pity their eyes looked nothing alike. Just then, the worms landed and began to crawl slowly over Victor's body. Little algae parted the tendrils slightly to give the worm space to crawl from his feet into his body. Throughout the process, Victor didn't resist. It seemed his consciousness had been frozen solid, leaving him helpless before Saul's final judgment. But Saul didn't relax. He kept glancing at the open diary in front of him. On the white pages, countless entries recorded Saul's miserable deaths. Going upstairs, you die. Not going upstairs, you die. Attacking Victor, you die. Saul could only keep analyzing and stalling for time, repeatedly simulating ways to survive. Until, amid countless death warnings, he finally confirmed that Victor's most dangerous wizardly was his voice. In the diary, Saul had died twice to the harp and 10 times to Victor's voice. And now the diary's final warning read: May 29, year 316 of the lunar calendar. You harmed yourself to resist the harp's sonic control. You froze his lips, finally sealing off the attack that reaches straight to the soul. But when you stepped forward to uncover the man's secrets, you died. Staring at the text, Saul felt no sense of triumph in capturing his enemy. This time, the diary didn't even specify how he died. Does that mean just approaching him leads to death, or does another enemy appear? Now unable to hear anything, Saul could only judge the intensity of the fight upstairs from the faint vibrations underfoot and the dust falling from above. He stepped back, 1 step, 2 steps. He really wanted to kill Victor while he had the chance, better yet, to capture his soul and consciousness. He believed Victor knew the secrets of this manor. At the very least, Victor must know why Ralph Manor has turned into this. But every time Saul tried to take Victor away or merely approach, the diary would promptly inform him in plain words, "You're going to die." And this time, there was no scene shown, leaving Saul unable to determine where the fatal threat lay. The last time he saw such a warning without a visible cause was when he stayed late at Kaz's laboratory and was besieged by waves of strange creatures. If the Tower Master hadn't shown up, Saul would have died in that lab. So, seeing a similar warning again, Saul held back from making any rash moves. What if I run away? Just leave Ralph Manor right now. This time the diary finally changed. May 29, year 316 of the lunar calendar. You learned caution, distanced yourself from danger, but your peace was short-lived. When you tried to escape, a giant worm descended from the sky. It caught the scent of your body and craved your delicious flesh. So tell us, is the inside of the worm warm? Not even escaping an option, Saul was stunned, then quickly realized something even more serious. When did he start trying to escape? It seemed to be right now. Boom! A thunderous crash rocked the entire castle. Walls, wooden beams, and stones rained from above. Falling with the debris were the long-missing white-haired wizard Klon and his apprentice Swan. Klon was covered in injuries. From each wound sprouted a green sprout, making him look like a sapling in early spring, lush and leafy. But he was still the better. His apprentice Swan only had half a body left, and the cross-section of his waist was wood. Saul could see Klon cursing as he struggled to his feet, while Swan writhed in agony on the ground, opening and closing his mouth in pain. Boom! Another deafening explosion. Though Saul couldn't hear it, he could feel it. A massive white shadow dropped from above, slamming into Klon and completely burying him in pale flesh. Just half a meter away, the barely spared Swan could only widen his eyes and let out a terrified wail. Cold sweat drenched Saul's back in an instant. The second white shadow to fall from above was a giant worm. Chapter 194, shifting the calamity eastward. Worms have arrived. Can death be far behind? Everything played out before Saul's eyes like a silent film, yet the horror was undiminished. His mind began racing as he stared at the diary in front of him. This latest entry confirmed that he had died inside the worm's belly, and that the worm was tracking Saul by scent. No, based on the previous entries, the danger I avoided was Victor. The final death came from that white worm. That bloated white worm, as large as an elephant, slowly twisted its body and turned toward Swan. Its body scraped against the ground with a sickening noise, like something being crushed beneath a millstone. Its face, when it came into view, made Saul's blood run cold. His eyes widened and he nearly cried out. The front of the worm had a human face. That grotesque face looked waterlogged and ballooned, deathly pale and wrinkled. Its eyes were a murky gray, as if someone had jammed a needle into them and stirred. Its irises were completely clouded over. Its nostrils were stretched grotesquely wide, big enough to fit a child's head inside. When it opened its maw toward Swan, Saul saw no teeth, just several human heads rolling inside its throat. Those heads stared blankly outward, not a single one struggling. Swan saw them too. As his gaze met those lifeless eyes, his screams faded into silence. He understood now, resistance was useless. His mouth hung open, lips trembling faintly as he murmured a plea to no one. Though Saul stood just a few meters away, watching the man and the worm, he could feel Swan's utter despair. The diary had already warned him. If he encountered the worm with his current means, he'd be swallowed whole. Saul clenched his fingers tightly. But just as the worm's gaping mouth was about to snap shut around Swan, it suddenly stopped. The human-faced worm's nostrils expanded and contracted, expanded and contracted. That grotesque, bloated head began to retract, vanishing back into its mountain of white flesh. Saul immediately sprinted toward the stairs, where Victor, bound but calm, was watching him. There was even a hint of amusement in Victor's eyes. Sure enough, in the corner of his vision, Saul saw it. The worm's tail was writhing. That milky white, greasy body melted and reshaped itself rapidly. The human face that had vanished at the head now re-emerged from the tail. And it was facing Saul. Up close, that face looked like it had been soaked for days in stagnant water, cracked, wrinkled, and reeking with a greasy stench. The strange odor was so foul that even Saul, who had grown used to the stench of corpses, felt nauseous. The worm inhaled deeply near the stairwell where Saul was trapped. Its grotesque face lit up with excitement. Hiya tilde, hiya tilde, hiya tilde. It laughed. Who knew which organ produced such twisted, distorted sounds? Its nostrils pulsed rhythmically as it inhaled Saul's scent with visible ecstasy. Through the slightly parted mouth, Saul could still clearly see those numbed human faces tumbling endlessly within as the worm's muscles contracted and shifted. Saul wanted to attack the worm, but the moment the thought arose, the diary warned him. Any aggression would provoke the creature and lead to instant death. He forced down his surging magic and focused his mind. Scent, smell. It was about to eat Swan, but then suddenly became fixated on me. What's on me that it finds so irresistible? Saul tried slowly backing away, but the diary warned him again. Any sudden movement and he'd be devoured. Then something flashed in his mind. If the worm was attracted purely to his own scent, there would be little he could do to hide it without alarming it. But the chances of a powerful worm being uniquely drawn to Saul were infinitesimal. Like pulling a random person off the street for a DNA test and finding a 99% match. Which meant something else. Saul had only brought one item that belonged to the castle itself. And items from the same origin might carry the same essence. An idea sparked in Saul's mind. This time, the diary didn't flip to a new page. A glimmer of joy passed through Saul's eyes. which he quickly suppressed, replacing it with terror and sorrow through sheer will and years of honed acting skills. He slowly turned his head toward Victor on the stairs. Victor remained bound by the tendrils of little Algae, his expression as calm as ever, even slightly amused. "I have only one shot," Saul told himself. "Victor," he whispered through a narrow slit in his lips, keeping his voice low, but he knew Victor could hear him. "Why did you kill so many? Why toy with me? If there's something you want, we can trade. We're both apprentices. Benefit should outweigh death, shouldn't it?" Victor blinked slowly. Little Algae's tendrils began to loosen. But Victor's body was still covered in frost. Saul's magic kept him immobilized. "I didn't kill them," Victor said, narrowing his eyes. "Not a single one." "So that's how it is." Saul's tone turned cold. "If you won't save me, I'll drag you into the worm's gut with me." Victor shrugged dismissively. "Fine, death awaits everyone. Threats don't faze me. A castle, a storm, and you, what an honor, brother." He slowly raised a hand to his chest, bowing slightly. "Since that's your answer," Saul suddenly moved, not toward Victor but at him. He tossed something, a small ceramic vial with a sealed top. The worm, which had been sniffing Saul intently, snapped to attention. Realizing its meal was about to flee, it opened its maw wide. But Saul didn't run or resist. Instead, he cast an arrow spell at the vial in midair. Smash! The spinning ceramic vial shattered in the air, releasing a pale yellow, oily liquid. Due to inertia, most of it flew toward Victor. Victor's eyes went wide. Frozen in place, he could only watch as he was doused in a full-body splash of holy oil. Chapter 195. You're impressive. Hey, The enormous mouth, just about to clamp down on Saul's head, suddenly swerved toward the small porcelain vial, revealing the holy oil. Despite its bulky frame, the fat worm changed direction in an instant. It was like it had been injected with a surge of adrenaline. It first contracted, then launched forward, so fast that it left behind only a blur. Its gaping maw opened wide midair. Shockingly, it was almost as massive as its elephant-sized body. Victor, unable to move quickly, could only lift his head and watch helplessly as that enormous mouth descended like a shroud of darkness. Boom! The violent impact completely shattered the stone staircase. Fragments flew everywhere, some scraping Saul's cheeks raw. But he had no time to enjoy the sight of Victor being swallowed whole, nor to register the stinging pain on his skin. The instant the worm leapt, Saul turned and ran. He dashed past the nearly liquefied Clon and Swan, who stood there crying wide-eyed, and sprinted toward the depths of the corridor. The little Algae, now missing several tendrils, quickly retracted behind him, slurping back into the base of Saul's neck like a noodle. At the end of the hallway, as expected, Saul found a passage leading underground. It was a large door built into the floor, covered in runes. Just as Morden had analyzed, the laboratory of this castle was indeed built underground. But as soon as Saul stopped in front of the door, a new problem presented itself. The entrance to the basement was sealed with a magic barrier. Although the magical currents flowing through it were slow and dim, Saul could still tell that the entire door was protected by a spell formation meant to prevent outsiders from entering. His eyes flicked from rune to rune, but he couldn't make heads or tails of it. The more he looked, the more dizzy and disoriented he became. The hallway behind wasn't that long. Once the worm finished digesting Victor, it might come this way. Clon looked done for, and Swan clearly couldn't resist the worm-faced monster. If Saul couldn't find a way in, or another escape route, he'd likely be seeing that death warning from the diary again very soon. With my current knowledge, there's no way I can crack this formation. If I try to force my way in, Saul gave a bitter laugh. Only the Tower Master might be able to break through it by force. This is the trouble the Tower Master wanted me to deal with. This isn't just danger. Without the diary helping me deduce a way out, I'd be dead a dozen times over. He glanced around. There were a few rooms at the end of the corridor, but they were all ordinary, no place to hide. Staring at the sealed entrance, Saul suddenly said, "Diary bro, could you please bring out Lord Morden?" He was going to try something new, not even knowing if it would work. But with the exit blocked, Saul had two options. Enter the basement and rely on the true wizard's protective spell formation to block the enemy or break through the wall. The latter, though, would definitely make a racket and alert others, killing any chance to explore further. And Saul hadn't forgotten. His primary reason for coming to the Ralph estate was to find clues about the diary. Who would have thought he'd get ambushed by the bizarre and mysterious Victor the moment he entered, and now was being chased by a giant worm? He felt that the danger here had already far exceeded the Tower Master's warning. This might be his last chance to explore the Ralph estate. "What do you want now?" "Honestly, I really don't want to answer your questions. I'm the Emperor of the Kema Empire, a second-tier wizard. How can I act as a mentor to a second-rank apprentice?" Saul ignored Morden's complaints. "Lord Morden, can you see the sorcery formation on the ground?" "See what? It's pitch black here. I can't see a thing." As expected, the consciousness in the diary couldn't see the outside world. But it could receive Saul's thoughts. In that case, Saul shut his eyes and began using his mental power to sketch out the magic formation on the floor. Soon, veins bulged on his forehead, and beads of sweat poured from his pores. A few seconds later, those beads turned into droplets of blood. He abruptly opened his eyes, the whites bloodshot, his black pupils twitching violently as he endured immense pain. He, clenching his teeth, he tasted the metallic tang of blood in his mouth. His head felt like it was being split open, as if someone had stabbed a thick surgical needle into his brain. And then the needle started sucking out his brain matter, making him feel like his very soul was escaping through that hole. But Saul knew he couldn't give up now. He was close to completing the mental replication of the formation. 1 second, 2, 3. When the final stroke was done, he seemed to hear the sound of tearing flesh. He exhaled sharply. "Huff, huff, Lord Morden, can you see it now?" "What?" "Kid, I don't know who you are, but you're impressive, really impressive. A second-rank apprentice, and you dared to replicate such a complex spell formation using your mental form. I believe that, as long as you don't die by accident, the wizarding world will hear your name someday." Saul gave another bitter laugh. People only grow when they're pushed to the edge. Though it felt like a long time, the whole process took less than a minute. A short time doesn't mean it was easy. If he had failed to finish the drawing in time, the entire formation structure would have collapsed, and he'd have to start over. "Lord Morden, can you unlock this formation?" The formation isn't exactly brilliant, but it does use a unique rune-linking pattern. I must ask, how much do you want it unlocked? If you want a complete analysis with full flexible control, even I would need a few days. I just need the door unsealed, and the ability to shut it again afterward. That's doable. I'll need 2 hours. I'm sorry, Lord Morden. I might only have a few minutes. Maybe not even that. The hallway was still quiet, but Saul didn't know when the worm-faced monster would become interested in it. It could be the next minute or the next second. All he could do was hope the Death Diary's warning would give him a few minutes, head start. If it's that short, then I can only break the seal forcefully. But that means once you close the door, the protective strength will be far weaker than before. Saul gritted his teeth and glanced back into the dark corridor. He couldn't hear anything, but there was a faint squelching sound of fat squirming and bubbling behind him, in rhythm with his heartbeat. White misty bubbles began forming in his mind's eye. He licked his cracked lips, He had made up his mind. He had to get underground first. "Then please, I'm counting on you. I don't have much time." This time Morden fell silent, and the black page of the diary stilled. Saul quickly used the time to begin meditating. Since he was in enemy territory, he couldn't go fully into deep meditation. He had to settle for a semi-submerged state to recover his drained mental and magical energy rapidly. The headache still throbbed, but he was used to that by now. Strong swimmers drown the deepest. His mental talent was exceptional, but also the part of him that got injured the most. "When I get back, I've got to have a real chat with Gorsa. Even if he's raising parasites, he can't treat me like this. No more help unless I get some real benefits." Saul rambled in his head to distract himself from the pain while healing his spiritual injuries. Finally, the diary lit up with fresh text. "It's done. Opening it is easy. Just connect these few nodes with magic and the door will open." A complex white pattern appeared before Saul's eyes. He took one look, and suddenly it felt familiar. Just then, the diary seemed to read his thoughts and flipped to reveal its cover. That white pattern was exactly the same as a symbol on the diary's cover. Chapter 196, The Butler's Request. There's definitely a secret about the dead wizard's diary hidden here. For a moment, Saul forgot all about the pain. A smile crept across his face. He had almost missed the secret hidden in this place entirely. If he could deepen his understanding of the diary, he could turn it into a locator much faster. Perhaps he could even unravel more of its mysteries and deduce additional ways to use it. Just then, the eerie pressure behind him surged again. Saul didn't look back. He kept his eyes fixed on the diary. He stepped forward and began channeling magic according to the pattern illustrated on the diary's black page. As several nodes on the array connected, the large gate embedded in the ground creaked open a narrow gap. Joy flashed across Saul's face. He quickly crouched down and lifted the entire gate. He dove into the underground chamber. From the back of his neck, little algae stretched out and helped pull the gate shut behind him. The moment Saul jumped down, his feet landed on something soft and yielding. Looking down, he realized the staircase was made of girls' arms. He'd never seen a man's arm so slender, pale, and with such dainty joints. Whoever made this staircase must have been seriously twisted. Saul had always been a pragmatist. If it weren't for research purposes, he'd never bother with something meant purely to frighten people. That said, if others did this sort of thing, he didn't really care either. Especially when the person who made it was likely already dead and rotting. He hopped down the steps quickly and took in the underground room. No doubt about it, this was the laboratory of the Ralph estate. But compared to Saul's own lab, it was a bit pitiful. Not that it lacked equipment. The room was filled with books and materials of all kinds. But on closer inspection, most of the materials were either cheap or common. The books were mostly ordinary texts, notes, and handwritten copies. In terms of variety and depth, it didn't even match the library Saul had visited, let alone the Tower Master's private collection. Still, the place was crammed full, an echo of a fallen wizard family's final persistence. At least it was safe for now. Saul exhaled deeply and pulled out a potion to treat his ear. The wound wasn't serious. A minor spell plus some potion would fix it. In a place this dangerous, losing his hearing was a serious handicap. If he ran into Victor again, well, he could afford to go deaf one more time. Just as he swallowed the potion, Saul caught a figure out of the corner of his eye. Instantly, he reached for the scroll tucked into his coat pocket, but didn't use it yet. "Wizard, sir," a man stepped out from behind a bookshelf. Saul recognized him immediately. "You're Knight Olaf." The tall knight, clad in metal armor, walked without making a sound. He was no longer among the living. Through his body, The bookshelf behind him was faintly visible. Once Olaf revealed himself, he placed a hand on his chest and gave a knight's salute. "Do you still remember me, and everything that happened at the entrance of the castle?" Saul asked. "Yes, sir." Saul eyed him up and down. "You were just a regular man. Your mental strength never even reached the minimum threshold for a wizard, and yet you've kept your soul intact after death. Someone must have helped you." The knight saluted again. "Yes, sir. An old man here in the estate helped me. He also knew I came here to take shelter." "So you're here on his behalf?" Olaf replied, "Yes, esteemed wizard. He didn't come to greet you himself, not out of pride, but because he truly cannot move. His name is Hunter, and he was once the butler of this estate. He hopes to make a deal with you. If you're interested, please follow me." Didn't show up when I was unlocking the door, but jumped out the moment I entered. Knows how to pick his timing, that's for sure. Saul glanced around. Sensing no hidden magical fluctuations, he decided to meet this hunter. Seeing Saul nod, Olaf led the way, taking him deeper into the basement. At the back of the lab was another chamber. But the door to this room had been smashed open, now lying pathetically on the ground. As Saul passed, he noticed it had been broken from the inside. He took in the traces around him and followed Olaf into the small room. It wasn't large, barely 10 square meters. No sealed books here, only stacks of notebooks piled waist-high and papers scattered all over the floor. The moment Saul entered, he stepped on a few sheets. Some were filled with writing, others just random scribbles. Scanning the room, Saul spotted an old man's head resting in an open-wall cabinet. The old man had snow-white hair, hollow cheeks, and dark, sunken eye bags. He looked ancient and exhausted. "I apologize, wizard sir. This is the only form in which I can meet you. Spare me the pleasantries. Who are you, and what deal do you want to make?" Saul wasn't in the mood to waste time with a talking head. If there were no clues here, he still needed to search for more information about the diary. The old man's lips tightened slightly. When he spoke again, his words came faster. "I am Hunter, the steward of this estate. My master was a first-rank true wizard, Lord Ralph. I wish to trade this estate's greatest treasure in exchange for your help in releasing my master." Releasing him, Saul frowned, then suddenly understood. That human-faced worm outside was Ralph. Butler Hunt's face twisted with sorrow. "Yes. My master once offended a powerful figure and was gravely wounded. We returned to the estate to recuperate. If everything had gone smoothly, he would have recovered in 5 years." "Who did you offend?" Saul immediately thought of a certain figure and pressed him. "It was the Tower Master." Saul's eyes widened, though inwardly he muttered, so it really was him. That meant the Tower Master had quietly helped him once, back then. "You don't need to worry about offending that great man," Hunt continued. "My master has no way out now. We originally planned to leave as soon as he recovered enough to move again, but nothing went according to plan. When we first returned, we deliberately activated some of the estate's defensive wards to keep intruders away. To normal people, it felt like a haunting. The first year passed in peace, but in the second year, 10 months ago, a wizard suddenly broke into the estate. He captured me and said he had a gift for my master." "That person, was it Victor?" The butler tried to nod but only blinked instead. "Yes, but sir, I must tell you that's not his real name. A magical seal prevents me from speaking it. When Victor found my master, he told him plainly that even if he recovered in a few years, he'd be permanently weakened and would only await death. But Victor claimed he could help my master recover faster and even become stronger." Ralph agreed. "No, though my master was severely injured, his mind remained sharp. He immediately sensed something was wrong and refused, but he had no choice. Victor played a tune and let him see the hidden dangers inside his body. If left alone, he would die in a few years. so he had to take the risk. What did Victor do? He gave my master a potion. Then he began sending people into the estate for my master to devour. At first, my master was cautious and analyzed the potion thoroughly, but eventually he lost control. When only a sliver of his consciousness remained, he hid me here. Since then, he's been stuck in the fourth-floor study. Victor continued bringing in victims, but later, he didn't just send people anymore. No wonder Victor claimed he'd never killed anyone. He's just a delivery man, feeding people into the worm's maw. But if Ralph had devoured other beings, that kind of cross-species fusion likely caused serious problems until he became neither man nor worm. This whole man-eating estate was Victor's design from the start. This guy probably wasn't as simple as Saul had thought. Do you know how strong Victor really is? Can he get in here? No, my master always met him in the fourth-floor study. He never let him in here. That put Saul a bit at ease. Still, to be safe, he asked Morden for his opinion through the diary. But Morden's reply made Saul's heart lurch once more. No, because I broke the seal this time, the array has likely lost its original energy. If no one replenishes it, it'll completely fail in about an hour. Chapter 197, Conditions. Saul glanced worriedly back toward the entrance of the basement. Just to be safe, I can only stay here for half an hour at most. After that, whether it's digging a tunnel or finding another way out, I can't let myself get stuck in this place any longer. If Victor wasn't just an ordinary apprentice, if he wasn't even an apprentice at all, then even Ralph, who had turned into a human-faced worm, might not have been able to defeat him. Saul's moves just now to divert the trouble to someone else. It's not certain who will be harmed in the end. So, you've probably realized by now, I'm not a true wizard. How do you expect me to help your master find release? And why would I take such a risk? As Saul spoke, he began rummaging through the little compartment without the slightest courtesy. He wasn't particularly obsessed with the idea of giving Ralph a release, but he had a hunch. If Hunter was trying to strike a deal with nothing but a severed head, he must have something incredibly valuable. And as for what was most important to Saul in this matter, it was undoubtedly any clue related to the dead wizard's diary. I hope you can help me kill my master, Hunter said solemnly. Saul was stunned, so it wasn't about saving him. Was it Ralph who turned you into this? Yes, Hunter gave a bitter smile. But I don't resent him. I just don't want my master to lose his dignity as a true wizard. I may not be a wizard myself, but I've served them all my life, and I know my master's current state is irreversible. If he still had any awareness left, I believe he'd never accept what he's become. So you want to help him find release. But I have to be honest with you. I'm no match for your master in his current form. I'm not about to throw my life away. I understand, sir. No matter how good the terms, no one would accept a mission that guarantees death. Please come over here. I have a bottle behind my head. At his words, Saul turned to his left shoulder, brushed off non-existent dust, and glanced briefly at the nearby knight, Olaf, before approaching the butler's head. Throughout their conversation, Olaf had stood silently 5 meters away. Even as a wraith, he kept his sword drawn and stood guard loyally. As Saul walked up, he saw Hunter's head placed in a large dish. A pale red liquid sloshed around it, though only a shallow layer remained, barely enough to wet a fingertip. It's probably this liquid that's keeping Hunter's mind functioning. Though intrigued by its composition, Saul knew this was no time to be running experiments. Little algae extended from the back of Saul's neck, poked around behind Hunter's head for a moment, and then pulled out a clear, round-bottomed crystal flask. "This is it," Hunter said, his expression complicated. "After acquiring Victor's potion, my master spent days analyzing its components, trying to craft a counteragent. He almost finished it but lost his mind before he could complete the formula. However, he was certain, once finished, This antidote could completely neutralize the potion's effects. Saul examined the vial carefully. But with your master's current condition, even if the potion's effects are removed, he probably won't survive anyway. Ah, right, your goal is to give him release. Living or not doesn't matter. Hunter clenched his jaw but couldn't refute Saul's point. This is no easy task. Even if I can refine the antidote, I'd still have to face Ralph again to administer it. That's incredibly dangerous. I can't see what you could possibly offer to make that risk worthwhile. I have the formula notes for the antidote. My master was just a step away from finishing it, Hunter offered immediately, lowering the difficulty of the task. Then he added, if you can create the potion, I will give you Master Ralph's blood and flesh inheritance. Blood and flesh is the culmination of centuries of the Bloodthorn family's legacy. Not enough, Saul rejected him without hesitation. Hunter froze. He hadn't expected that the heritage of an entire wizard family could fail to impress the boy before him. He gritted his teeth and continued. There are also Master Ralph's research notes from decades of study. They don't just cover blood and flesh. There's also knowledge and insights from many wandering wizards, all refined and verified by my master. They've been compiled into a book called the Catalog of Blood. Anything else? Saul asked, expressionless. Hunter opened his mouth, momentarily forgetting he didn't need to breathe. Sir, that's the most valuable thing in Ralph Manor. As for mundane gold and silver, I doubt it would interest you. I don't want gold or silver. I want knowledge. A family with 100-year history can't possibly have only Ralph's catalog, right? Saul stared intently at him. Hunter looked at Saul blankly, then suddenly came to a realization. Sir, are you interested in records from the last calendar era? We do have some of those, but they're all unverified accounts. Their authenticity is questionable. Saul's heart skipped a beat. He felt like he'd finally asked the right question. That's not your concern. The price you've offered so far isn't enough to make me risk my life. As for the rest, I'll need to see it first. I understand. Please push the bench under the table and straighten it along the right side. Little Algie stepped forward to help. Clicking. As the bench slid beneath the long table, a spring clicked, and the floor tile under where the bench had been popped up. Little Algie poked its head in to check for traps. Finding none, it retreated back into Saul's neck. Saul approached and crouched down. The mechanism had no magical components and therefore gave off no magic energy, something easily overlooked by wizards accustomed to magical detection. The small compartment was half a meter deep. Inside were several books, a stack of loose pages, and a few spell scrolls. Saul glanced at the scrolls. Only one was a first-tier spell, Minor Fireball. The rest were all zero-tier spells. He couldn't help but wonder, why would anyone bother turning zero-tier spells into scrolls? With a sigh, he tossed the scrolls to the ground and began pulling out the books, propping them up beside him. He skimmed titles and guessed at their contents. His instinct told him there was nothing useful here. Finally, he picked up the stack of loose pages of various sizes and materials and began flipping through them quickly with his thumb. A series of characters, some familiar, some not, flashed before his eyes. Suddenly, Saul stopped. He pulled out a few pages and his eyes began to glow. These pages described how, during the Bloodthorn family's separation from the Bloodrose family, they had taken with them a book called The Dead Wizard's Diary. Though the following pages didn't go into detail about the diary's contents, they did mention its origins and some family lore surrounding it. The Bloodrose family had never valued the book and had handed it down to Ralph's ancestor rather casually. So this diary wasn't something passed down by the Bloodthorn founders after all. Its origin lies elsewhere. He scanned the pages quickly, absorbing the words. Behind him, Hunter, nothing but a head resting on a tray, couldn't see whether Saul had found anything of value. Watching Saul treat the family's prized knowledge like junk, casually tossing things aside, filled Hunter with both heartache and anxiety. He wasn't worried Saul would take the documents. After all, most of them were unverifiable records of questionable credibility. The truly valuable items, the blood and flesh legacy and Ralph's research notes, were still in Hunter's possession. What he feared was that Saul might refuse the deal after all. If that happened, there was nothing more he could do. Saul was the only one who had made it into the basement in a long time. That was why Hunter had chosen to negotiate with him. If Saul walked away too, Hunter wasn't sure if he'd ever get another chance. At that moment, Saul stood up, tucked the few pages into his coat and turned around. "Hunter, is there anything else you're hiding from me?" "No, sir." "Then explain something. You're just a head on a dish, sitting in a cabinet. How do you know your master, being kept on the 4th floor and fed like a worm?" Chapter 198, Antidote, Poison. Hunter choked on his words. Had he actually said that just now? At that moment, Olaf, who had remained silent all along, suddenly spoke. "Master Wizard, Mr. Hunter, may I say a word?" Saul turned his head. "Go ahead." "It was Mr. Hunter who awakened me from endless darkness. I am willing to vouch for him with my personal honor. If you agree to the transaction, and there is anything you need me to do during the process, please give the order." Hearing the knight's words, Hunter glanced at Olaf sideways, eyes brimming with emotion. As if making up his mind, he spoke. "Master Wizard," Hunter said gravely, "if you can help Lord Ralph find Release, I will tell you, a clue that may help you advance to 4th rank wizard." 4th rank? Yes, Hunter's voice trembled. That's the extraordinary level at which a wizard can transcend the limitations of physical death. Though Hunter didn't specify what the clue was, Saul instinctively felt it must be related to the diary. Otherwise, how could a minor, declining wizard family have two extraordinary beings involved in the secrets of death? So the few pages I found were just a glimpse of the diary's origins. Ralph and his team must have studied it more deeply. Makes sense if they didn't understand the diary. Why would Seed have gone mad over it? Saul picked up the half-finished potion Ralph had made. "I can help you make the potion, but you'll have to give me the clue first." This, Hunter hesitated. That was his last bargaining chip. But after a moment's thought, he suddenly looked toward Olaf. "Knight Olaf, would you come here for a moment?" "Me?" Olaf approached Hunter with a confused expression. Suddenly, Hunter spat out a glowing, blood-red magic crystal. The crystal landed right on the heart of Olaf's translucent figure. The next instant, Olaf's astonished form was completely drawn into the crystal. Losing its host, the blood-red crystal clinked to the floor and rolled to Saul's feet. Having done this, Hunter instantly grew incredibly weak. Even his head seemed to shrink slightly. "Master Wizard, I have entrusted all the information to Knight Olaf. If you break your word, he will immediately become a vengeful spirit, destroy the information within, and haunt you forever. I'm truly sorry. This was a restriction I had to set." Saul picked up the magic crystal. In the reflected light, he could vaguely see a pained figure and beside him, several tiny rolls of parchment. Olaf would never have guessed that the butler who had just been moved by his loyalty would, without hesitation, turn him into a vengeful spirit to ensure Saul kept his promise. "I want to check the goods first." "No problem." Saul carefully extended his mental power into the crystal. As soon as he touched the rolls of parchment, he caught glimpses of their contents. One of them turned out to be Ralph's research on the dead wizard's diary. But when Saul tried to read further, the vengeful spirit of Olaf began to show signs of exploding. He quickly stopped probing. Looking at the butler, now reduced to only a head, Saul said, "Seems like you were well prepared." Awakening Olaf's soul was likely a backup plan from the very beginning. Olaf had thought he was being rescued out of kindness, unaware he was just being used. Saul tucked the magic crystal away in his robe and gave Hunter one last glance. He walked to the table with the half-finished antidote, swept everything on it to the floor with a flick of his hand, and pulled blank parchment from the bookshelf. He dipped a fountain pen into fresh ink. "Hunter, Master Wizard, give me the formula." "Yes," Hunter's eyes widened, and a smile appeared on his face. Anyone capable of deciphering the basement's entry array could surely complete Lord Ralph's antidote. What Hunter didn't know was, Saul was not working alone. "This formula doesn't seem like an antidote at all," Saul muttered to himself 10 minutes later, having fully analyzed Ralph's so-called antidote. "It's more like a poison for release." "You're analyzing it correctly. This formula is familiar to me, but I can't recall where I've seen it. Do you have a second dissolving liquid? If so, add it as a catalyst. It'll accelerate the spread of the poison." "No," Saul replied. He hadn't come to Ralph's estate to do experiments, so most of what he carried were tools for combat and survival. Morden suggested several other materials, but unfortunately, Saul didn't have them, and Ralph's lab didn't have the proper conditions to conduct experiments. Another 5 minutes passed, and the watching Hunter grew anxious. He began to worry that this young wizard might not actually be as skilled in potion analysis as he had hoped. But he easily cracked the Bloodthorn family's defensive array. How could he struggle to complete Master Ralph's antidote? Hunter couldn't tell if entrusting everything to Saul had been a stroke of genius or utter foolishness. But after months of waiting, he had fallen into despair. The nutrient fluid in the dish sustaining his head was nearly depleted. In another month or two, Hunter might decay into a pile of rotten flesh. He had neither the time nor the patience to wait any longer. Another 5 minutes ticked by before Saul suddenly began scribbling rapidly. Diary summon Bill. Bill specialized in toxic elements. He should be knowledgeable about potions. Even though Bill's consciousness was barely hanging on, this was the perfect opportunity to use his strengths. This formula isn't meant to save anyone. Bill truly lived up to his reputation as an exceptional third-rank apprentice from the Wizard Tower. With one look, he saw through the essence of the potion. If, as you said, the test subject has devoured many people and creatures yet hasn't collapsed, then his flesh must have either lost all biological barriers or is being forcibly held together by some immense power. This potion is penetrating in nature. It has no restorative or stabilizing effect. In short, it's designed to destroy the body's structural balance, a method for quick death. So what do you want, salvation or execution? To kill, but is there any way to preserve his soul? Saul responded without hesitation. Even if there were a chance, he wouldn't allow Ralph to survive. If Victor hadn't shown up, Ralph would have been the very trouble Saul came to eliminate. But like Seed, Ralph knew of the diary's existence. Saul wanted to preserve his soul and turn it into a new black page in the diary. However, Bill's next words were disappointing. "If I specialized in light or dark elements, maybe. But as I am, I can only help destroy the body, and that's only if you already have a targeted potion." "I see," Saul sighed. None of the 3 people tied to the Black Pages specialized in those 2 attributes, and with Saul's current strength, he was far from capable of extracting souls. "Wait, I remember copying a formula in Grind Sale Town, one that forces the creation of a vengeful spirit. But that formula, responsible for harming countless girls, was mainly designed to extract ordinary human souls. It might not work on a true wizard-level fleshworm. To hell with it, so long as the diary doesn't resist, it's worth a shot." Saul made up his mind. At the same time, in a blind spot out of view of the head-only butler, Saul quietly retrieved the blood-red crystal containing Olaf and the scrolls. A slight smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. A butler, no matter how experienced, is no wizard. Trying to bind me with a vengeful spirit, you've walked right into the trap. With the help of Morden and Bill, Saul began his experiment. He unearthed numerous dusty instruments from storage. Little Algie split off dozens of tendrils to assist him. Time ticked by. The increasingly frail hunter barely managed to open his heavy eyelids, just in time to see Saul rising from his chair. "Master," his voice was growing faint. Saul walked over, surprised to find the man's hair already withered like autumn leaves. "If the formula you gave me was accurate, I think I've finished the antidote." Saul raised his right hand, letting Hunter see the crystal vial filled with a liquid that rolled like thick oil. Hunter forced a smile, a dim light flickering in his fatting eyes. "Yes, Master, the antidote looks just like Lord Ralph envisioned," he said. "Huff the oil dissolves oil huff." Chapter 199, Drawing the Worm. The antidote was complete. The diary raised no objections. Saul gripped the glass vial tightly in his hand. He had paid a steep price for this potion. The black page representing Bill's consciousness had completely shattered and vanished once the experiment concluded. Even at the very end, unaware of Saul's true identity, Bill used a dim, hair-thin white script to express his gratitude. "It's been so long since I've thrown myself into research like this. Maybe, ever since I advanced to a third-rank apprentice, I accidentally lost sight of my original purpose. I will never be able to surpass my brother, even if I willingly let others use me for it." With that final line, the black page disintegrated into dust, vanishing into the air. Saul knew Bill had a brother named Billy. Ferguson, the man who had once tried to use a stolen candle to threaten Saul, had mentioned him before. But Billy had never personally shown up to cause Saul any trouble, as if he didn't even have a younger brother. Cold, but that also meant one less problem for Saul. Yet now, seeing Bill mention his brother in his final moments, Saul felt a twinge of mixed emotion. In this world of wizards, reason always triumphed over sentiment. Even blood ties were just another form of currency to be traded. Saul had blood on his hands too, but he believed he still had some humanity left. If not for the warm memories of his past life propping him up, it was the friendships he'd made here that kept him from despair. Bookish Kelly, the upright Byron, and maybe more in the future. Saul pushed his tangled thoughts aside and turned to the sleepy-eyed butler. "The antidote is ready. Now we need to lure Ralph here. Do you have any suggestions?" "You can use me as bait," Hunter replied without hesitation. "Stored in my mind is a vial of potion Victor secretly gave my master for his research. Since losing himself, my master has become obsessed with its scent. As long as you open the basement door, I'll crush the vial. If the master is still in the castle, he'll come straight for it." So the holy oil Victor gave me was actually the same potion that twisted Ralph, Saul thought. "All right, He paused mid-sentence, because just then the diary reappeared, with a death warning. In the diary's version, Saul did exactly what he planned, lured Ralph in, and while the creature was distracted by Hunter, splashed the antidote on him. Ralph's outer skin did begin dissolving rapidly, but even in his dying throes, he had the strength to kill Saul. The result, mutual destruction. The potion takes too long to kill. After several attempts to find a way to buy enough time, Saul finally understood. The long-acting nature of the antidote was that something Hunter didn't know, or something he chose not to tell him. This butler, Hunter, probably never intended for Saul to leave the castle alive in the first place. All those little bits of wool sheared from Saul, it was all to make him willingly serve. If not for the diary's warning, Saul might have still been basking in the satisfaction of unearthing the Bloodthorn family's darkest secret. Still, he didn't show any sign of suspicion on his face. Instead, he followed the original plan and began drawing a magic formation on the floor. The formation wasn't complicated. Any wandering first-rank apprentice could manage it. For Saul, it was no problem at all. Done. Saul turned and carried Hunter's head out from its compartment, placing it at the center of the formation. "What's this?" Hunter asked, staring blankly at the array on the ground. "A binding formation. It'll trap you and Ralph together," Saul said casually. Hunter, after all, was no wizard. At best, he was a sentient prop. Despite all he had seen, he still lacked access to the core knowledge. He lowered his heavy eyelids, lost in thought. After setting down the head, Saul stepped outside the formation. "Little Algie," he whispered, "can you get this potion into that big worm's mouth?" A black tentacle slithered out, its tip splitting open as a long black tongue coiled around the vial in Saul's hand, tucking it safely away. Saul still trusted little Algie quite a bit. This little creature had chosen to parasitize him of its own accord, and had performed reliably ever since. Of course, it is also because the diary did not deny little Algie's loyalty. But even if the diary hadn't denied little Algie's loyalty, it did deny Saul's current plan. May 20th, year 316 of the lunar calendar. You have a good partner. It can help you carry out many dangerous missions. But even if you plan to destroy your enemy from within, you still underestimate its resilience. It's all subdermal tissue. Even its ass can turn into a face. Who's softer than whom? You still got eaten. Your body, sealed in melted grease, was waxed and preserved. Maybe one day, you'll be displayed in someone's collection. A warning to future generations. Even attacking from within doesn't work, so the real solution is to buy enough time. Saul mulled it over. Hunter, are there any other exits in this lab? None, sir. This was the Master's most important and secret place, to enhance protection. Hunter didn't finish the sentence, but Saul understood. Fewer exits meant better defense. Then I'll have to throw the antidote and escape the basement immediately. The diary confirmed that I could use the seals to trap Ralph inside. If he hasn't died by the time the gate fails, I'll abandon the vengeful spirit capture and escape early. Saul made up his mind. When he looked back at the diary again, it gave silent approval. A grin crept onto Saul's lips. But at that moment, the butler, who'd been watching Saul the whole time, suddenly opened his mouth, revealing a small transparent vial between his teeth. Saul immediately noticed, "That's the holy oil." "Yes, sir, I don't have much time left." Saul took a deep breath, his chest rising. "I understand. When I reach the door, bite down on that vial." Hunter blinked once in acknowledgement. Saul quickly climbed the stairway made of dismembered girl arms and opened the door, then jumped, hand in hand with a girl, into a blind spot just beneath the basement entrance. At nearly the same time, Hunter bit down on the vial, and the heavy door above Saul popped open, exposing the narrow 1-meter-wide passage. Saul didn't smell anything, but he heard it. Skin dragging across the ground, a slick sliding scrape. Ralph's coming. Saul held his breath. No other footsteps. Victor, probably gone, hopefully dead. Quick, so quick. Through the gaps between the arms overhead, Saul saw a swollen, pale white face appear at the entrance. The face was wider than the opening, squishing into the square tunnel like a bloated meat pouch. It sniffed twice, then began forcing its way downward, heedless of its bulk. Squelch, squelch. Squelch. The frictional sound was maddening. Saul regretted healing his ears so early. Under the worm face's relentless wriggling, the passage became a pasta press. A rectangular strip of flesh squeezed down, flopping onto the stairway, then rolled off one wall less side due to its girth. Ralph, drawn by the scent, didn't notice Saul hiding on the stairs. He surged straight toward Hunter's head. With a thud, he hit the floor, and with a single sniff, sucked Hunter's head into his body. Saul saw that Hunter wasn't afraid at all. He looked upon his former master with sorrow and relief. But just before he was swallowed whole, Hunter looked at Saul and revealed a long-hidden malice in his eyes. Saul tensed, little Algy lunged. Black tendrils darted toward the grotesque mass on the ground, but the human-faced worm seemed to sense it. From the white fat, countless human arms suddenly sprouted. Long and short, dark and pale, slender and muscular. They were the arms of those devoured over time. The arms flailed, groping at the air, trying to catch the approaching black tentacle. For now, little Algy, still holding the antidote, couldn't get close. Chapter 200, Flame Pearl. Saul saw that little Algy's assault was being blocked, so he immediately flipped and jumped onto the stairs made of arms. From his palm, he rapidly unleashed a flurry of strike undead spells. His mental form was stable, and his magic was abundant. Casting his most familiar strike undead was like a machine gun going rat-tat-tat-tat. The human arms struck by the black glow immediately shriveled up like cotton touched by fire. But just as the original arms withdrew, new ones appeared without end. And the shapes of these new arms became increasingly bizarre. Some even resembled the limbs of arthropods and wild beasts. However, Saul had already prepared for this inability to get close to the target. A tendril as thick as a python suddenly split into many midair, like a tightly braided rope suddenly unraveling, spreading wide like a giant net. Every finger-thick tendril opened up a shark-like maw at the tip, filled with rows of black teeth. Some fell onto the arms, some were grabbed, and some, luckily, pierced through the layers of defense and reached the massive bug. No matter which tendril it was, the moment it made contact with the enemy, the mouth opened 180 degrees and chomped down. Chomp, chomp, chomp. The white grub-like body, essentially made of fat, was quickly bitten open in many places. As long as the very tip of the tendril wasn't grabbed, the tendril could keep extending until its maw reached its target. The densely packed shark teeth sank in as soon as they touched flesh, burrowing deeper and deeper, leaving pits of all sizes on the massive bug's body. But these small holes were still too insignificant to seriously harm the giant human-faced worm. Ralph's head continued to lick the floor in a dazed fascination. Then the thickest tendril outside the fight suddenly opened its maw, and a crystal vial was rolled out by a black tongue, hovering right above one of the worm's small wounds. Nearby arms were all tangled up with other tendrils and Saul's magic, leaving this lone tendril unchallenged. Whoosh! The barrage of strike undead suddenly stopped, replaced by a sharp arrow. The arrowhead pierced the fragile crystal vial, spilling a transparent liquid and spreading a strong kerosene smell throughout the room. The moment the vial shattered, the smaller tendrils fighting the arms instantly severed their own tips and recoiled. The arms that were splashed with liquid instantly twisted grotesquely, and Ralph finally regained consciousness from the pain. His greasy body trembled as, lifted his head from the floor, only a trace of blood remained. The butler's head was still lodged between those thin lips, its eyes now hollow sockets, but now turned outward, gazing dully at the world of the dead. Ralph shut his mouth. His face quickly vanished from the front of the worm and bulged outward from the side facing Saul. But unfortunately for him, that was the area most heavily doused in liquid, especially the many wounds little Algy had chewed out. Those were decaying much faster than the skin or arms. The small pits quickly expanded into gaping craters. Hi-ya! Ralph suddenly thrust his upper body up and roared, not much pain in the voice, showing that he had more resistance than the arms on his body. Saul saw several human heads writhing painfully in Ralph's throat. Among them was the butler's, whose face still held a faint, relieved smile. Even though the human-faced worm Ralph was covered in wounds, it could still move. Its entire body started to contract inward like a coiled spring ready to launch. Saul immediately realized that the enemy was about to attack. The scene of that spring-like leap swallowing Victor whole was still fresh in his mind. He grew tense, but didn't immediately flee for the basement exit. His plan wasn't finished yet. Saul lowered his hands, and 2 spell scrolls slipped into his palms from his sleeves. He raised his hands again, preparing to hurl the scrolls. Suddenly, a red light burst from his chest, and the image of Knight Olaf instantly appeared before him. Olaf lunged toward the exit. His previously upright and slightly dumb expression vanished completely. There was also a semi-transparent face twisted into a sneer. "Shameless thief, die here with me. Dare to covet the glory of Bloodthorn, pay with your life." But Olaf's form froze in place, barely half a meter away from the blood-red magic crystal. He struggled to move forward but couldn't budge an inch. "What's going on?" Olaf looked panicked. This clearly wasn't part of his plan. "Why can't I get out?" Saul didn't respond to Olaf's alarm, nor did he tell him that the knight's feet were still stuck in the blood-red magic crystal behind his back. Nor did he reveal that this was all his doing. He had no time to deal with the Wraith Knight now. Saul kept moving. With a quick flick, he threw out the scroll in his left hand while activating the long-held soul armor in his right. A transparent barrier instantly enveloped Saul and also Olaf, who was tied half a meter away. The scroll flying through the air suddenly ignited without fire, transforming into a massive fireball midair, charging straight at the lunging fat worm. The ultimate technique of countless wizards, fireball. Wait, correction. This was a destructively powerful second-tier spell scroll. Flame Pearl. Second-tier spells were powerful spells only third-rank apprentices could learn. Flame Pearl was especially known for its destructive force. "If it's oil, it has no reason not to fear fire," Saul muttered. The incredibly destructive second-tier spell collided head-on with the springing worm. Both carried immense energy as they met in the air. The atmosphere distorted instantly, and a violent explosion erupted at the point of impact. In the blinding blast, Saul vaguely saw a white, fleshy blob thrown backward by the shockwave. The entire room trembled. Fortunately, the basement had been reinforced by magic. Otherwise, it would have collapsed for sure. Saul's soul armor shook violently. Under the continuous assault of the explosion's shockwave, it quickly dissolved. But this had been part of Saul's plan. He watched as the human-faced worm writhed in pain on the floor, knocking over every piece of furniture in the room, managing to put out most of the flames. But flickering embers still clung to it, because the crystal vial that little Algie had spat out earlier didn't contain an antidote, but rather flammable oil mixed with a small amount of antidote. This stuff was cheap, so Ralph's lab had plenty of it. Now, thanks to little Algie's gnawing, the Flame Pearl's explosion, and the subsequent burning fueled by the oil, the worm was covered in large, open wounds. These exposed injuries were no longer white. They revealed stretched white fascia packed with pale yellow fat. The arms that had sprouted were torn to pieces by the explosion and the worm's rolling. One black tendril with a small flame atop it shot forward again. Taking advantage of the worm's rolling, it opened its mouth and rolled out a smaller crystal vial. This time the bottle contained thick, golden, oil-like liquid. Snap, a familiar arrow shot out, once again shattering the crystal vial. The viscous fluid splashed into the large wounds, producing a sizzling sound. A strip of white fascia was instantly corroded away, and the surrounding yellow fat collapsed like butter in a pan, unable to offer protection. The wound expanded rapidly, and a huge cavity formed on the worm's surface. Ah! A scream of agony rang out. The human-faced worm, now reeking of charred flesh, twisted in agony on the ground. This time it was real. The pain caused by the antidote surpassed all the other injuries. Ralph suddenly lifted his head and glared at Saul. Though his facial features were stretched to the point of distortion, a thick hatred could still be seen. He no longer cared about the pain. He just wanted to tear apart the small man who had caused him such suffering. The worm compressed again, though due to the heavy corrosion, its speed was greatly reduced. Saul knew he couldn't wait any longer. The antidote had already penetrated the dermis and subcutaneous layers. Ralph was finished. He didn't bother watching the outcome. He turned and ran. The knight, still stuck in the blood-red crystal, was instantly flung in a semicircle, forced to follow behind Saul. Behind Ralph, a black tendril swiftly retracted. Bang! Saul escaped the basement. Once little Algae emerged as well, he immediately shut the door. Magic surged and severed the door's connection, and a streak of magic light resealed the entrance. Boom! A thunderous impact struck the door immediately after. But the door didn't budge an inch. The entire castle trembled slightly, yet the basement door showed no sign of opening. Saul stood up, snuffed out the flame atop little Algae's head, clapped the black ash from his hands, and sighed in admiration. No wonder this is a wizard family with 100 years of heritage. This basement door is built like a fortress.